now it gives me great pleasure, to introduce Bob Schultz. Today we're happy to have Bob Schultz, a Minnesota MUFON member for the past 27 years, giving a presentation on Wendelle Stevens' investigation of the Billy Meier Pleiadian Contact case. Bob's presentation today has taken more than 100 hours to research and edit during the past 2 months. You will see, for the first time ever shown in public, an hour interview with the famous UFO researcher Wendelle Stevens, recorded in 2009, a year before he passed away. While in high school, Bob became a ham radio operator. He designed and built what may have been the first cell phone. Bob obtained an electrical engineering degree from South Dakota State College in 1960. At his first job at Goodyear Aircraft, he helped design the Navy's first portable aircraft simulator contained in 2 semi-trucks. While working at Remington Rand Univac, he was one of 4 logic design engineers who designed the Navy's first transistorized digital computer, the Naval Tactical Data System. He designed and taught the first digital computer course at St. Paul VTech. While working at Control Data Corporation, he designed many computer graphics display systems, one of which was used at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory to analyze nuclear fusion reactions. For his work at LLNL, he had to obtain a top-secret Q clearance. Bob obtained his private pilot's license in 1967 and has logged 1,800 hours in single-engine private aircraft. His longest round-trip journey was to Scotland, flying a Mooney Mark 21. Bob retired from CDC in 1990, became very interested in the UFO phenomenon, and started attending Minnesota MUFON meetings. He has attended 35 national UFO conferences in the past 20 years, many while serving on the audiovisual crew recording the events. He has taught UFO classes to 5th grade students and community education, UFO classes to adults. Bob obtained training in television productions and started producing a local community TV production, UFOs and the Paranormal, which has been running 2 hours per week for the past 14 years. Please join me in welcoming Bob Schultz.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. Today we're going to be talking about the Billy Meier case of Pleiadian contacts. So, contact with the Pleiadians. Did Billy Meier's ET contacts really happen? If you have researched this on the internet, you'll find many people on the internet that say that this didn't happen, that it's a big hoax, that they really can't accept all these beautiful UFO photos that Billy Meier has taken of all the UFOs that he's seen from the time he was a child to at least the 80s. He's taken thousands of pictures, and I think these people have a hard time accepting it because they're not spots in the sky. They're up close, structured craft, and you're going to see some of them today. So I heard this story in 1994 for the first time when I went to my first conference in Nevada at the International UFO Congress. And Wendelle Stevens spoke, I think it was 2 hours that night, on the Billy Meier case. Well, who believes in the Billy Meier story? You don't have to believe in it. You should look at the evidence that I'm going to present in this presentation today and decide for yourself whether you think it's true or not. But I know for a fact that these people that are listed here, Wendelle Stevens, Michael Hessman, Methuselah Meier, his son, and Phobal Chen, who knew Billy when she was only 10 years old, when he was visiting India. And she saw the craft, and she saw the celestial beings, she calls them, that visited him in India when he was there for a couple of years. She later, that was at 10 years old, but she later became the Cambodian UN ambassador. And she came to one of our conferences and spoke about her early time when she was 10 years old and verified that everything that you hear about Billy Meier is true. Okay, today I'm going to have this little slideshow. It's 44 slides, but I'm going to go through it really fast. And then Wendelle is going to give a little tour of his home, which I visited his home in March 10th of 2009, 1 year before he died. And that's 7 minutes. And then we're going to hear this presentation that Wendelle, it's an interview that I had Wendelle do for me when we were in Cabo, San Lucas together in Mexico for a week. We rented a 2-bedroom condo down there, and I was able to get Wendelle to talk to me for about an hour and a half on an interview, and you're going to hear about 54 minutes of that interview. That has never been shown any place before. It's been locked up in my archives, and we brought it out for this special presentation today. Then we'll have a break, and then you will see Wendelle's investigation of the Billy Meier contacts, which he gave a presentation on at the International UFO Congress on December 1st, 1994. That presentation was 2 hours. I've edited it down to 1 hour and 19 minutes so we can try to get out of here by 5 o'clock. Okay, so first, a short history of myself. This presentation is going to be on our YouTube website. It's going to be seen internationally. So a lot of people don't know me. I know most of you know me, but I want to review a little bit of my history first and then show you how I got acquainted with Wendelle. So you're going to see me as a little baby here. There I am, 1 year old, my first Christmas, and a couple of years old, 4 years old, I guess. And my dad had a habit of giving me a new electric train every Christmas. And then I'm in college here. This was my first year in college at South Dakota State College, and this picture was taken in 1956, but I became a ham radio operator in 53, and that's kind of my little setup there in the dorm room. Then I graduated from South Dakota State College in 1960, and then, of course, got married and had a couple of kids. This is my son, Gary, on the right, who is standing in the back of the room back there. He's on audio. And then this was the first computer I designed, helped design, I should say. I designed the top 4 drawers here. As you can see, there's a drawer down on the bottom that has a bunch of logic cards that is extended. Normally, when this computer is working, all the drawers are closed. But the top 4 rows was my responsibility, and it took about a year and a half to design that. Then these computers were used by the Navy on every ship. And this picture was taken when I visited the USS Midway, which is now a museum in San Diego. So I took this picture in 2016 showing that this computer is still operating. All these lights are flashing. Sorry it isn't in video, but they're all flashing, and it's running a diagnostic program. It has been running since 1963 without a failure. So unbelievable. On a carrier, they usually had 3 or 4 of these computers doing different functions. And on submarines, I know I was in one of the submarines one time. They just have one room enough for one of these computers. Then after I worked at UNIVAC for 3 years, I transferred to a little startup company called Data Display. And this was the first display system that I designed there. And then here's the one that I did for CDC, Control Data Corporation. And there I am using a light pen, I don't know, doing something in 1972. Then after I got my license in 1966 and having 20 years as a pilot, I decided I wanted to do a really big trip. I wanted to go over to Scotland in a single engine aircraft. So I let it be known that I would like to have a co-pilot with me. So this is Mike and Bob here, and we're just getting ready to leave on our trip. It took 33 hours, but we stopped at many different airports on the way. And incidentally, the first person that flew the Atlantic took 33 hours too. And our airport, Terminal 1, was named after him. Who's that? Lindbergh, right. So he took 33 hours, but he did it in one fell swoop. I did it with about 10 stops in Greenland and Iceland and all sorts of places. There is the airport we had to find in Greenland. Now this is about July 1st or June 29th, it says there. Okay? Well, I had heard so many other people that had made this trip and never found the airport, and they had a lot of problems when they didn't find the airport. So we didn't have GPS at that time, and there was no nav aids here. We had to find this just by dead reckoning, and the compasses don't work up above the Arctic Circle, so you have a hard time finding this airport. And when you get there, all they have is 50-gallon drums of gasoline. They don't have a pump. They don't have any buildings or anything, just 50-gallon drums, sealed. And you have to buy that 50-gallon drum, whether you need it or not, and we only needed about 30 gallons. You had to pay $500 for that 50-gallon drum. Okay, then Bob joined MUFON in 1990. I did some research on crop circles in 1994. This was my first crop circle that I researched, and it was in Malacca, Minnesota, 3 circles. It's in corn. This is corn that's laid down flat in a circular pattern. And it's laid down in one direction on the center circle and the opposite direction on the outer circles. Then another person came to me in October 1994 and said, in Blaine, right here, near 242 and Highway 65 was this field. And the farmer, his name was Albert, he was harvesting this field of corn and going down here back and forth. And this is unharvested here. And he ran across this circle. And he went in and he told his wife in the farmhouse here, Leslie, there's some darn kids that made a circle out in our field. She says, no, don't plow it down. Don't do anything with it. It's probably a crop circle. Well, he didn't. He plowed around it, and harvested the corn around it. And then she invited me out there to investigate. It turned out after a very thorough investigation, it was not a crop circle formation. It was an actual landing of an alien craft. And they actually abducted her daughter, Jody, from this farmhouse at the time they landed. We had much proof of that, and we had so much proof that the CIA was after me for a couple of months. They were following me around and trying to get my pictures, and I wouldn't give them pictures, and they were really mad at me. This is one in Hamel, Minnesota, and it was in August '99. There's a close-up of it. Then I attended 18 international UFO congresses. These symposiums were held in Nevada each year, beginning in Mesquite, and then we moved down to Laughlin. But the first conference was in Tucson. I didn't attend. That was in 1991. I didn't know about it then. But I attended the one in 1994. Now, the person that started this conference is Wendelle Stevens. And he had a weekend conference in 1991. That was the first International UFO Congress. Later, the next year, 1992, 93, they moved to Las Vegas. And they were right on the Strip. And in the last year they were there, they got a lot of hassle from local government officials. And they said they didn't want them there anymore. They had to move. So they moved the conference to Mesquite, Nevada at that time, a smaller venue, not as noticeable as the Strip in Vegas. So Wendelle, he enlisted the aid of these two people, Terry and Bob Brown. Bob was from Oakland, California, and had a video business recording all sorts of air shows, like the Oshkosh Air Show. He also went to France and recorded shows over there. So Wendelle wanted him to start recording all these speakers at the International UFO Congress. Well, Bob did the introductions, but Terry did all the work. Terry was the one that worked at home and got all the speakers to speak, and took all the reservations for all the 500 people that attended these conferences. And Bob was off doing his work. Well, I went to visit Terry a week ahead of time and help her get ready for this conference. These are two of their daughters. When I first knew them, they were like 4 and 5 years old. So they grew up during this time that I was attending the conference. This is Bob and Bob. This is the hotel that they held the conference at in Laughlin, and it's the same hotel that is used by the Starworks USA conference now. There we are setting up the 2 screens. These are 12-foot screens. We have 2 projectors behind the screen, rear view projection. This was in March 2009 in the ballroom. Then I also attended 11 MUFON conferences. And first one was that I went to, I think, was in Detroit in 2003. This was Bob Brown bought this balloon and had it made especially to advertise the International UFO Congress. The problem was that most of the time there was so much wind, we couldn't put the balloon up. But sometimes it was up there, and here it is in Laughlin, Nevada. Then while I was there, I got acquainted with a crew, a community TV crew from Tucson Community TV. And this is a time I visited their set down in Tucson in March 6th of 2009, and got acquainted with Jim Roger, who's the main host of this show. There's actually 2 hosts. Jim Roger started it, and later Kyle Dayton joined him and helped him on this cutting edge Revealing the Truth UFO show for community TV. He produced, I think, something like 150 episodes. So I worked with him on that. I showed his show up here in the Twin Cities, and he showed some of my shows down in Tucson. And this is our Joe Seymour, who has been with the conference since the beginning too, and he helps us set up everything. Then I was asked by my aerobics teacher to teach a class on UFOs. This was at Bally's back in middle 90s. What does it say up here? 96. So I said, Ron, you know, he was a 5th grade teacher, and I said, they aren't going to let me teach a class during classroom hours on UFOs. Oh, yeah, I think they will. I'll talk to the principal, and I'll get him to agree with it if you're willing to volunteer to teach this class without getting paid. And I said, yeah, I don't need any money. If they want me, okay. So this course was 13 weeks long, 1 hour a week, held during homeroom period. And so we had 15 students get out of homeroom, and they just couldn't wait for this class to start. Every week they were 5 minutes earlier. I said, I'm not ready yet, I'm not ready yet. And they said, we can't wait, Mr. Schultz, we want to know what you're going to talk about today. And so then this was written up in the New Brighton paper. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but that's me. And then the Minnesota Education Association heard about this class. Now, MEA is a statewide organization. And I was really shocked when they put this article in their monthly journal. One of the most popular of these mini courses is Science, Politics, and History of UFOs, taught by Bob Schultz, retired electrical engineer. I want to teach that science is a neat thing, explained Schultz. There's a lot more out there than we know about. I want to encourage kids to strike out on their own. So that was really something. But then the Mounds View Community Education, the head of that group, she called me and she says, can you teach this class to adults? I hear these 5th graders just love it. Can you teach it to adults? Oh, I guess so. So then I taught classes every quarter for 2 years, and these were some of the classes I taught. It got to be really a chore for me, and I said, I've got to get to people. I only get 15 people in each of these classes, and it's just not enough. I need to get to more people. So that's when I decided I needed to learn how to produce community TV programs. So I went to the local station here at Roseville called CTV 15, and they taught me how to do television productions. And so I produced this show called UFOs and the Paranormal every week, and I've been doing that. It's 2 hours every week For 14 years, I've produced 152 episodes now. Well, Wendelle and I got to be friends at these conferences, Wendelle Stevens. The trouble is, we were so busy at these conferences that it was hard to get enough time to talk to Wendelle. I would have to go up to his room at the hotel and maybe get 10 minutes with him because everybody else wanted to talk to him too. So Wendelle and I decided we needed to get together. I mean, he was a pilot, I was a pilot. We needed to talk more. So we decided to take a vacation together, and we spent a week in Cabo, San Lucas. We took our wives with us, and we rented a 2-bedroom condo at this facility here, Pueblo Bonito Sunset Beach Resort. So during that time is when I recorded this interview with Wendelle that you're going to watch today, when I was here. He was out on the balcony in one of these rooms here speaking to me. This is Wendelle and Susie's bed. There we are. Susie, his current wife at the time, he was married a second time, Lorna and Bob and Wendelle. October 19th, 2006 is when I was there with Wendelle for that week.
We bought this when we were looking for more space because it had a bigger patio.
Oh, yeah, it's
Oh, that's nice.
goodness sakes.
You see what's happening here? These are wild lemons. They let
They're soft.
sucker grow,
Yeah?
and the sucker, that's a wild stock they're coming from.
Huh.
They're knobby.
Yeah, they are.
That's a Lisbon lemon on whatever
Boy.
wild stock, but the wild stock produced these lemons.
But they're big.
Yeah.
They sure are.
Well, this is a grapefruit here.
Oh, okay.
That's
Oh,
pretty,
my goodness
pretty good
sakes.
size there.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Yes.
They do good here. These are bark limes. They're the green bar limes that you buy in the grocery store.
I don't
But
know.
this is what they look like when they ripen.
Oh,
I'm
the
a
but
lime,
they turn.
a bar lime.
Bars.
Bars? I don't
Yeah,
know.
but they're also the bar limes. that you
Okay.
buy-
Do they turn green then, or
They're,
no?
they dye them green again if they let them get too ripe.
Oh,
They pick them green for the bar.
oh, that's why we were used to seeing them green.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
This is what they look like when they ripen. Look at all the blooms we're getting, but no bees.
No bees
okay.
to pollinate them.
The bees that
I
are.
don't know what's happening to bees. We're
Yeah.
going to have very few,
Well,
very
they
little
say
fruit
they're
this
bad.
year.
Yeah, they say
Yeah.
they're drying off or whatever.
We have raccoons that come over the wall and catch all the fish we put in there. And you know, we put 100 guppies in there in a week, and they caught every single one. When I try to catch them, it takes me a month to get them all
Good grief.
with a net. And
They had
the
them
raccoons get them with their bare hands, just like that.
Wow. Ha. That's amazing.
That's too bad though, because you'd like to have fish in there.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I like them. I'm going to have to get something so big that when they stick their hands in there, it'll get bit. Right? Like sharks, I guess.
Yeah, get piranhas.
Yeah. Oh, come in, I want to show you. I got a Chihuahua.
Chihuahua.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Honey? Bob, over here. It smells like cat. But this is my library.
Wow.
Wow.
These are all UFO books in here.
Every one of them, huh?
Everyone.
Wow.
Like 1,500.
1,500
Oh,
UFO books.
And more on this side. This is a photo collection all up here.
I gotta come in here. Get over
You
here.
gotta shut the door up here. You didn't hear that.
Did the white cat go out? No, he's down here.
Now, what are all the blue books up
Those
there?
are binders of photos.
Oh, photos.
Yeah.
Wow. All your photo collection. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Geez, I don't have a wide enough angle here.
And that's the books and photo binders of photos. Here is a collection of videotape. A drawing table, a wall of videotapes here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh.
All UFO videotapes. That's only about half of them. The rest of them are in boxes in the storeroom.
Storage, yeah.
Yeah, I believe that. I've got a lot of boxes too downstairs in the
Yeah,
basement.
we never get them all out.
You don't have basements in Tucson, do you? Or
Which?
do you have
Basements?
basements?
No.
Yeah.
No.
You have basements where you live, don't
Yeah.
you?
Yeah.
So
that would be
everything
handy to have a
everything goes to the basement.
Our basement, you just barely walk through, literally.
And
Where do
I
you-
got one more room here.
Where do you spend most of your time doing your UFO research? Or
Well,
where's your desk? Or
this is my UFO research computer.
Okay.
That's my drawing table. I also work on World War I airplanes. But,
oh, we got the Hubble space shots up here, and some star charts. And
see the title, Aldi's? That's the third child of the Gorbachev when he was rising in the Communist Party in Russia. And
what's the name again? Aldri?
The name of the book there, Aldi's.
Oh, this one right in front of me. So this is all in Spanish.
Yeah. The third child born to them was a unique child. He's probably one of the indigo children
Okay.
because he excelled in everything. He was extremely bright from the very beginning, walked at 9 months and spoke whole sentences by 1 year, learned to read when he was before kindergarten and things like that.
Yeah.
The kind that can pick up any instrument and play it. So Aldi's was the one that began to tell his father that he should make some changes in Russia, and showed him the changes that should be made. That he's the one that influenced Gorbachev to break up the Cold War, stop the Cold War by breaking up the forces
Yeah.
behind it.
It says on the front here, Aldis is the child of the star Alcyon, so that's where,
Yeah, he told him
He's from?
Told him he came from.
and the perestroika. Is it available in the United States or down
No,
in South?
not
in the United States.
South America is probably most of the read Romniak's book. He wrote 18 books.
That was just a 7-minute segment of a tour of Wendelle's place, and I'm sorry I was shaking around so much, but it was hard to get. I'm always in the back of people. I always get people's backs. I wish I was in the front so I could see them coming into the room. But anyway, you got the idea. He has a very small house. It's 4 bedrooms, but no basement, and he really enjoys growing his fruit and so forth. He's really a naturalist sort of person. So we're going to play the next video now, which will be the interview that I recorded in 2006 while we spent that week together in Cabo San Lucas.
Hi, well, first of all, my name is Wendelle Stevens. I was born in Round Prairie, Minnesota. Grew up in Little Sauk, Minnesota, just a few miles from about 5 miles from Round Prairie. Little Sauk is halfway between Sauk Center and Long Prairie, and they're both about in the geographic center of the state of Minnesota. I was raised in Little Sauk. I went to primary school there and even secondary school in the 8th grade, and then went to high school in Long Prairie. I was not interested in sports. I was not a sportsman. I was interested in nature more than anything else, and I liked walking in the woods. I liked looking at the animals and the creatures. I liked flowers. I liked studying the trees and their seeds and things like that. I liked nature things more than anything else, natural things. We raised chickens and cows. We had 4 cows. I had to milk them every morning and evening. Had to feed the chickens in the morning and evening. I didn't like the chickens because we had too many of them and they were always pooping all over the yard. And I had to clean the chicken house, which was a big mess, a stinking mess. I didn't mind cleaning the barn, but I did not like cleaning the chicken house. But I grew up there, and I finished high school in Long Prairie. In the last months of high school, I joined the National Guard in Long Prairie because everybody else in the senior class was joining the National Guard. Hitler was marching in Europe, and it seemed to be the patriotic thing to do. And then it was also a way to make some easy money. We had guard training once a week on Saturday, and they paid us like $5 for each training session. And so that was where I was when I graduated. And we had a little railroad that ran through town, and we often saw the hobos coming through town riding on the rails under the boxcars. The boxcars were open, they were riding in the boxcars. And I thought that would be a kind of a fun thing to do. We often played around the railroad bridge and saw them going by, and they'd wave to us, we'd wave back. So I got on rails under a boxcar one time and went to the other town. It was kind of a thrilling ride. And I ended up telling my mom I'm going out to California to see what was out there, and she had a brother that lived out there, owned a gas station, and she gave me his address, and I rode the boxcars out all the way out to Los Angeles.
All the way out from Long Prairie to Los Angeles. Wow.
Yeah.
How long did that take? A month?
No, it just took a couple of weeks.
A couple of weeks?
Yeah, not even a week, a couple of weeks, but like 10 days.
Okay.
And I found him in California, and he hired me right away, put me to work pumping gas in his gas station. And it was there when I was coming home from downtown one time, got off the trolley, was coming back to his house when I passed the post office and saw the big poster on an A board out in front with a big screaming eagle diving with his claws out like that and his wings open, and a sign underneath that said, "Join the Air Force, see the world." So I went in the postmaster to ask him about it, and then he said, yeah. He said, he gave me a card with an address on it. He said, here's the recruiting people, go talk to them. So I went and looked them up. I told them I wanted to fly. And the recruiting sergeant looked at me kind of funny. He said, how much experience have you got? And I said, none. He said, what's your educational level? I said, I just graduated from high school. He said, oh man, he said, you have to have a 2 years of college education to be a pilot, to join the cadets, recruiting for cadets. And I said, well, I don't have time to get that. That'd take another 2 years. He said, oh yeah, of course not. He said, but there is another solution. He said, often, if you're in the service, they can waive a lot of these things, and they might be able to waive your education requirement if you're already a soldier. So I said, well, sign me up. And he did, and he recruited me into the tank corps. And when I reported for boot training, I got the basic boot training, and then I was reassigned to a tank unit as a mechanic, a tank mechanic, and went to a tank mechanic school. I didn't like that because that was all heavy metal and dirty work and greasy, and I kept telling them I wanted to be an aviation mechanic. And my commander kept telling me, but you're here now, and you have to go to aviation school. I told him about my requirement for the education. He said, well, he said, yeah, that's kind of tough. But he said, if you want to be around airplanes, we can probably arrange a mutual transfer from this unit to an aviation unit. And he did succeed in doing that. And I got assigned to a squadron. And they sent me to aviation mechanic school over at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. That was a nice course. It was about a 9-month course. And I came out a graduate aviation mechanic with all the specialties, propeller, carburetor, fabric, all of the things that made up the package of aviation mechanic duties. And I was assigned to duty on the flight line in a P-38 squadron. And then I was assigned to an airplane, It was my job to keep it fueled and polished up and ready to go and perform the regular daily inspections and the weekly inspections and the monthly inspections when they came along. We had books of all these inspection requirements. And I'd be sitting there early in the morning with the engine started and running them up, warming it up, and checking all the gauges and everything with the chocks under the wheels. Felt all the power in the engines, and I just wanted to gun it, jump the chocks, and go. And a couple of mechanics did, and they got disciplined for that. So I didn't really do it, but I kept wanting to fly one more and more. And I kept pressuring my squadron commander. I was submitting applications for cadet training. And I decided for myself that the only way I'm going to get attention is to make them like me. So I decided there was always squadron duties. There was yard policing, there was KP, kitchen police duty, which was peeling potatoes for the mess hall, washing up dishes and things like that. And I volunteered for all of the duties that the others were assigned and griped about it, even take other mechanics' duties for them. And my squadron commander finally noticed that I would do that, and I'd even get a bag and go out and pick up cigarette butts around the yard when there wasn't a policing detail. And he called me in one day and he says, what do you really want to do here, Stevens? I said, I want to go to aviation cadets. He said, well, let me see what I can do. And a few days later he called me back in and he said, you know what? He said, I did some research and I found a way to get you in aviation cadets. He said, the old World War I pilots, most of them flew through as flying sergeants. He said they have a flying sergeant's training program. It's still on the books. He said, I'm going to recommend your enrollment in the flying sergeant's program. So he did, and I was accepted. And I got an appointment to the Aviation Academy as a flying sergeant trainee. I was already a sergeant on the flight line. And so I didn't have to have 2 years college education, but I knew a lot about the airplanes by now. I knew how to fix them and everything. And that did get me an appointment to aviation cadet training as a flying sergeant. There was only one other flying sergeant in the whole program, me and one other guy. And instead of being appointed as cadets, we were appointed as flying sergeants in the old World War I program, and we wore our sergeant stripes, and we were drawing the aviation cadet trainee pay, which was about a staff sergeant's pay. But because I was already a sergeant, they immediately made me a cadet officer, and I was marching the other cadets around. And then I got promotion, a cadet promotion to a higher officer rank.
When you graduated, how many hours do you think you had?
Flying time?
Yeah.
Probably 40.
40 hours of
40 hours total time, yeah. And so I went to Fighter Advanced on P-40s, and when I was coming out of the Fighter Advanced training class, there was a bulletin on the board looking for graduate cadets with prior engineering experience to volunteer for the first Army Air Force test pilot training program. And I thought, that'd be interesting. They suggested we learn to fly a number of different airplane types. So I ran right in and signed up for that, and got accepted for that too, which also required a 2-year college level, but I was already a mechanic on the flight line and had a mechanic certification, and I guess somebody thought that'd be a good idea to put me through pilot training or through the test pilot school, because I already knew how to maintain the P-38. But I did get in the first Army Air Force test pilot school at Kelly Field. And that was interesting because they gave us separate checkout courses there on all the aircraft in the inventory. We flew all the Army airplanes and all the Army Air Force airplanes and all the Navy airplanes that were in the inventory, regular equipment. which was the B-17 and the B-24, P-38s, P-40s, P-38s, P-51s, P-47s, the B-26, two versions of B-26, a short wing version and another long, lighter version.
Now, wouldn't you have to get checked out in each one of those?
You had to go through each one.
You
Each
have to go
one,
up
each
with
one was a
another
full week course. And we had to go through. We had to fly them in the simulator first. It was just an old link trainer.
They had link trainers?
Yeah, we used link trainers there, and then we'd go up with an instructor pilot, and he would demonstrate the characteristics of that particular airplane for us first, which ones had problems. One of the P-40, for instance, you couldn't turn too sharp to the left because it had a tendency to roll off on the left wing, and you dive in nose first and killed a lot of pilots. Each airplane had different peculiar characteristics to watch out for. Then after 2 or 3 rides with the instructor pilots, they'd send you up alone a half a dozen times, and then you'd go on to the next course. And I found that interesting because I liked airplanes. When I was a kid, in grade school and high school, I was building model airplanes. And I built a number of stick models, balsa and paper models that flew with a propeller driven by a rubber band. I never got any of them to fly real good, but they would take off and crash. And but I loved the airplanes, and I loved what I was doing. I loved being able to fly the real ones. They didn't always crash. And so some of the odd ones that I flew was a YP, I don't remember what it was. It had 2 pusher engines on the wings with pusher props, and the seat in the nose of the nacelle, the engine nacelle, for a gunner. So it had a pilot and 2 gunners out in the forward part of the engine nacelles on the wings. I forget what it's called. It was a Bell aircraft, but I don't remember. And then I liked the B-25. It was for a light bomber. It was real light on the controls, easy to start, easy to make sharp turns, could hold altitude good. I did like the B-17 and the B-24 because I learned there that the bigger the airplane is, the easier it is to land, because you have to set it up further back, and you just get everything all set up so the gauges are working right. And the bigger they are, the more they land themselves. When they get down to in ground effect, they flare out by themselves almost because of the bigger wings. And the fighters were a little tougher. You had to fly the fighters all the way down, and they would stall out easy if you're too high above the ground and things like that. I flew a P-39 where the propeller shaft comes up between your legs to drive the propeller in front. The engine was at your back. I didn't like that one because if you hit anything, you're going to sure get smashed by the engine. But that course was the thing that got me probably the biggest adventure of my life. When after I came out of the test pilot school, having flown all the aircraft in the inventory, there was another recruiting message on the bulletin board looking for engineering officers, they called them. I graduated with a flight test pilot specialty, and they were looking for graduates with that specialty to man a new organization that was being created. It was called the ARU Floating, Aircraft Repair Unit Floating. And the first one, I was selected for the initial category for the first one. And I was just out of test pilot school, and when they appointed me to organize the first ARU floating, they gave me a 1-grade promotion, and they made me a first lieutenant already. So all the rest of the pilots around me were second lieutenants still. I had a couple of those in my squadron, test pilots. And the ARU floatings were an aircraft repair squadron unit with all the shop equipment and everything built into the hull of a Liberty ship that had a flat bottom bow that could be run up on the sand, the bow would be lowered, you could drive vehicles out and pull airplanes with their wings off or folded into the hull of the Liberty ship to work on them. They rapidly filled my squadron up, so we were full strength in about 2 months. And then the second ARU was started, and they took about a third of my people away to get the initial cadre for the second ARU. And then they started a third one, and they took some from the second ARU and some from mine to provide the initial cadre for the third ARU floating, ARUF. And then we sailed with the fleet. What I found interesting at the time, by then I'd gotten another promotion. Now I'm a captain and all my officers are first lieutenants. And the Air Force didn't want the Navy controlling our ship, their repair squadron. So our ship was manned with a merchant marine crew. We sailed with the Navy. We were an Air Force squadron on a Liberty ship with a merchant marine crew sailing with a fleet. So all of our ship's crew were civilians. But our merchant marine captain was taking his orders from the fleet, the Navy commander. Anyway, it seemed like kind of a unique arrangement. But I didn't live in a foxhole during the war. I had a stateroom on the Liberty ship. I had fine meals in the officers' mess. We had a laundry aboard the ship. I had clean sheets and clean clothes all the time. We had good food. We had great food on the ship. But we were constantly supplied with great food. So we had steaks 3 or 4 times a week, and the food was good. And we kept our ship's galley open at night, stocked with fresh milk and cheese and breads of different kinds and different kinds of meats, cuts of meats. You can make sandwiches all night long if you wanted to. And so we were fighting the war from a rather luxurious point of view. And we sailed as the first ARU floating right into Ulithi Island was the first place we went to. Ulithi is in the Mariana Group. It's a very small island. It had a coral airstrip that a ship had offloaded a blade, a dozer, small dozer, that scraped the coral level, and then they laid pierced planking on top of it. It was steel mesh planking that was linked together, and they covered the whole airstrip with this pierced planking to make a solid runway on a coral bed. And that was what the Corsairs were landing and taking off on. And it was just long enough to get off when we had the morning breeze. And I don't know what would have happened if we didn't have a breeze, but there was always a breeze. But the runway was very short. And we stayed there for over a month servicing those Corsairs. The cockpit. I had one mission when we were on Ulithi, getting my flying time in, and that was to fly a Curtiss Helldiver bomber. It was a little bigger than a fighter, but not a big bomber. It was a carrier bomber. And I was supposed to take a 1,000-pound bomb over to Yap, where the Japanese were, just less than 50 miles away, dropped the bomb on the desalinization plant that was furnishing all the water for Yap. And when I got to Yap and saw nothing but women and children on the beach, and the town, not much of a town at all, all there was women and kids as far as I could see. A few Japanese soldiers, but they were in tents on the end of the island. And I'm going to bomb out the only water supply on the island, and what are those women and children going to do? They can't drink salt water. So I flew over the desalinization plant, dropped my bomb about a half a mile beyond it, went back and reported a direct hit and got credit for it, and saved the women and children their water supply. They didn't strike it again because they thought I had taken it out. It wasn't operative. And later I felt that was my major contribution to the war effort. I didn't destroy the life support for a number of women and kids. Right. Innocent women and kids. They weren't combatants. Then we moved to Mogmog, which wasn't too far away, and they only stayed. We barely got ashore on Mogmog we were moved again to Okinawa. We pulled into the harbor at Naha, and we were there. When we pulled into the harbor, there weren't many ships there. The Marines had landed on troop ships and had landed on the south tip of Naha, and they had swept north to the north in about 3 days, conquering the whole island, and we had moved into Naha airstrip behind the Marines and set up camp there, tent camp. And I'm pulling aerodrome officer duty this particular night when about midnight we got a call, a radio call of an airplane coming in with a VIP code but not requesting honors. And I thought, that's strange. They usually request honors if there's a VIP, a general aboard. So I knew there was a general aboard, but I was kind of curious about why they were moving so discreetly. So the airplane, got in my Jeep and I drove out to the end of the runway, and when I heard the airplane circling the airfield, I told them to turn on the landing lights. You could only see them from the approach direction when they're on. So the enemy couldn't see him unless he was on the approach. And we just turned them on long enough for the landing, then turned them out again. And the airplane, the B-17, brand new B-17G, landed and rolled out, taxied up, parked by the operations tent. I let him in with my Jeep. They all piled out and came into the operations tent that had a bare bulb lighting in the ceiling in the center under the point. And I'm filling out the forms for their arrival when the navigator was talking to the pilot just under the light, and the navigator took a closer look and he said, "Man, your eyes are yellow." And the general's aide was a full bird colonel, and the general was a 2-star general. And the colonel came over and took a look at him. He said, "Yeah," he said, "your eyes are pretty yellow, man." Then the colonel turned to me and said, "Have you got a doctor here?" And I said, "Yeah, we got a flight surgeon." He said, "Well, get him down here." So I sent a Jeep to get the flight surgeon up out of his tent, bring him over. He came with his little stethoscope and a bag, and he took one look at the captain, pulled his eyes open, looked down at him, and he turned to the general. He says, "This man's not going anyplace or he'll die. He's got a bad case of yellow jaundice." And the general says, "Oh," well, he turned to the colonel, and they talked for a couple of minutes, and the colonel told me to get my commander down there. So I sent the Jeep to get my commander up, brought him, our lieutenant colonel. He came over, and the general, when he came in the tent, the general says, "Look," he said, "get your personnel man down here. I got to find the pilot with the most 4-engine time to replace this crew member." And so the lieutenant colonel got the personnel officer up, and he came over, and they sent him over to look in the records and see which pilot. We had about 20 pilots on the roster. Which pilot had the most 4-engine time. Of course, I was the only one in the fighter squad that had any 4-engine time. So the general he told my commander, he said, "Well, get a replacement for him. We're going to have to take him with us." And then he told my commander to cut orders, transferring me to his 8th Air Force Service Command for 2 weeks. And to get a replacement for me, we would be gone for 2 weeks, get a replacement for it. And then he turned to me and he said, "Look," he says, "they're getting a replacement for you. You go back to your tent," he says, "and get a bath, wash up, change your clothes." He said, "Class A uniform." He said, be prepared to be gone for 2 weeks. He said, "No weapons, not even a jackknife. No pistol, no jackknife, nothing. And meet us back here at 4 o'clock in the morning. We're going to be airborne at 6. It was already midnight. So I did, and I met him. I was early because I'm anxious to see what's going to happen. And they all trooped in about 5 o'clock, and we got the airplane ready, and we took off right at 6 on schedule. And the general went back to the waist of the airplane and opened the safe, a big iron safe with a dial combination lock on it. He opened the safe and took out an envelope and brought it up to the cabin, pilot's cabin, between me and the co-pilot, opened it up and looked at it. And then he turned to the navigator, another Air Force captain standing there, and he showed him the letter. He said, "You think you can get us to this coordinates?" The navigator says, "Certainly, let me have the letter." And he took it and he went back to his plotting desk. He told us to take up a heading and a speed and keep climbing while he replotted our trajectory to make that rendezvous point on that time. He came back and just a couple of minutes later and said, yeah, he says, corrected. He gave us about an 8-degree correction on the course and a rate of climb, and he said we should be at such and such a point at such and such an altitude on such and such a time. So that was my first experience with real test pilots. The colonel was the chief of flight test from the Air Materiel Command at Wright Field, and the captain was a senior flight test officer at Wright Field, and the co-pilot, a First Lieutenant Laverne D. Vickers, was another test pilot from Wright Field. They're all from Wright Field but me. And so Lieutenant Vickers, as we're getting in the airplane, he says, look, he said, I don't know how much 4-engine time you got, but or B-17 time, but I'm sure I got a lot more than you, so why don't I take the pilot seat, you take the co-pilot seat for a while. I said, fine, no problem. So he got in the pilot seat, and I got in the co-pilot seat. We took off, and we were starting to climb out to these coordinates. And he handed the controls to me. He said, okay, you got it. And I took the controls, and I'm climbing out, bracketing the altitude that I'm supposed to have. And he grabbed the controls again and said, look, he says, hold your altitude within 50 feet and don't deviate 2 degrees from your heading. And I never been flying that way. So I tried that. At first I couldn't do it. And he kept grabbing the controls and shaking them like that. I said, hold it. And I finally got to where I could hold it within 50 feet and 2 degrees. Then he settled back and ordered a cup of coffee from the general's aide back there. And I really struggled because it was hard to stay out of 50 feet. There's air currents, you're changing all, which meant you had to anticipate them. As soon as you started to change, you had to make the correction immediately or the change would follow through. So it was difficult, and it took a lot of strain and effort to stay within 50 feet and 2 degrees. But I did pretty good. And when we reached the coordinate point, the sky was filled with home defense fighter, Jack fighters. They were little pot-bellied fighters, looked like miniature P-47s with red ball rising suns on the wings. 30 of them all around us. Here we're unarmed in a B-17, unarmed, don't even have any weapons on our person, and we're surrounded by 30 armed airplanes. And I thought, I had a kind of a queasy feeling in my stomach because they could have shot us down at any point, but they didn't do it. And the leader came across from the side and waggled his wings in front of us to follow him, and the rest all took positions on each side. And we followed the squadron, the Japanese squadron leader, maybe an hour, 45 minutes, to Atsuki Airfield, south of Yokohama. We didn't know what airfield it was until we landed. He motioned for us to land first. We did, and the rest of the Jack fighters circled the airfield while we landed. And as we landed on the runway, we looked at the windsock and we took the runway into the wind. And as we landed on the runway and are rolling out, a black Model A sedan pulled on the runway in front of us with a big wooden sign on the back, white lettered in black English, "Follow me." So we followed him, turned off the landing runway onto a taxi ramp, and taxied back to a row of hangars, and he led us to a hangar. The doors were open, and there was a man standing on each door, ready to close it too, I guess. They're big sliding doors. And they motioned for us to taxi the airplane in the hangar, which you don't do because you can get a fire in there, and it's closed space. But we did because that's what we're ordered to do by by the directors on the ground. Taxied it in the hangar, and they motioned for us to cut the engines. We did. The men on the doors closed them tight. Now we're on the ground in enemy country in a hangar with the doors closed and waiting for something to happen. And then the doors opened just the width of a Model A again, and 8 Model A's came through the door and lined up in front of the airplane. And then men started piling out of each one. There was 3 in each of those Model A's. The The ones in front had Japanese senior politicians in mourning gear, I guess they call it. The gray and the two-color gray striped trousers, the cummerbund, the white shirt with black bow tie, beetle-tailed coat, and a silk top hat. And besides, there was about 3 or 4 of those. I don't remember exactly which. There was a few of those, but there was a lot of admirals and generals with a lot of medals and braid and high rank got out of the other cars behind them. And our general walked to the head of the line, met the chief diplomat, and he took him down the line and introduced him to all the others, who they were. They were the highest ranking men in the Japanese services. And then the general came back to us with a Japanese captain. He said, here's Captain so-and-so, he's a fighter pilot. He went to school in Harvard, he speaks English perfectly, he'll take care of you. Then he said, we're going with these gentlemen, if we're not back by 5 o'clock, you're on your own. Well, we're in enemy country in a locked hangar, and if he doesn't get back by 5 o'clock, we're on our own. What are we supposed to do? Crash out the doors of the hangar and take off? Anyway, the Japanese captain didn't seem to be too worried about it. He invited us to go up to the officers' quarters and get rooms. And he took us up to the officers' VIP quarters, got us each a separate room, including the enlisted crewmen. We all got separate rooms in the Japanese bachelor officers' quarters for VIPs. Then he took us to the officers' mess in the officers' club for lunch. And we were sitting at a table with him. We went through a buffet line, filled our plates. Sitting at a table with him when other Japanese pilots came in flight gear for lunch before they took off on a mission. And when they saw us sitting there, the enemy sitting there in Class A uniforms, they come over to the table and ask the Japanese captain, what's going on? He'd say something to him about that, and then they asked us where we were from. We told them Naha, and he told them, and they'd laugh, say, they're not going to have a base to go back to. We're going to blow it out of the water this afternoon. And they'd get their lunch and go sit at their own tables and chuckle and tell stories. Kind of kept looking over at us, the fish in the fishbowl. And then when they left, they all waved to us, said, don't worry about going home. There ain't going to be any home to go to. And the Japanese captain interpreted that. And they took off. And the same thing for supper. And every time we went to the officers' club, there was a new bunch of pilots scheduled to fly. And the same thing happened several times over. And so the Japanese knew that we were on their base. I don't think any of those crew members knew what we were there for, because they were still flying hot combat missions. The war is still going on. And there may have been some that suspected it, but they didn't let on. They're still going off on their missions. And the Japanese captain said, you know, we were talking about among ourselves. We thought, here we are, the first ones to land in Japan, and we're watching them take off against our home base. And the Japanese captain said, no, you're not the first. He said a P-38 ran out, got low on fuel yesterday. He came in and landed at another base nearby. He said the flight crew saw him taxi up. When he pulled up the flight line and cut his engines, they dragged out the fuel hoses and gassed him up. So he started the engines back up again, took off, and went home. So there was a P-38 that landed and it got gassed up by the Japanese at an enemy air base that he had probably just strafed and went on back to his whatever base he came from.
This is 1945.
That was in 1945, yeah. Another strange thing happened. This tells you how prepared we were. Another ship came in, probably an aircraft tender came in, that was carrying a Nordwind Norseman, that same airplane I was flying the freight routes in Mobile with, short takeoff and landing airplane, a big one that could carry cargo. They brought the Norseman in on a ship and offloaded it with derricks on the dock at Atsuki. And our government made the Japanese take down all the buildings and all the light poles and everything on the dock so that so that this Nordwind could take off on on the wooden dock there. So then they called for volunteers to fly the airplane. I was the only one that had flown that one before, so they sent me over to pick it up and bring it to Atsuki. And I did, and it was easy. We had a little bit of about a 15-knot breeze on the nose, and it went right off the dock. There's no obstructions and hard surface. It went off easy in the available space, and I flew it over to Atsuki. The next morning, another airplane multi-engine airplane came in and landed at Atsuki, and a man got out, a civilian, and I was told to take him to Hiroshima. And they gave me maps with Hiroshima marked on it, the landmarks to look for to get there. I took him over, and when we flew over Hiroshima, this is just a day or so after the Nagasaki bomb was dropped, but Hiroshima was still smoking. And when we got to Hiroshima, I couldn't believe it. The ground zero was swept clean. There was no buildings, there was nothing. It was just paved road space with the buildings blown away. And we landed in the middle of the cleared space, and on a street, but with no buildings on it. Landed the Northrop, and this guy got out with his briefcase, and he went around and took some measurements with a little device and made some notes in a notebook, and came back, and he got in the airplane, said, okay, we can go back. And I went back to Atsugi, and the other airplane was waiting for him. When we got back, he got in the other airplane, took off and left. And after he was gone, another American standing there said, you know who that guy was? I said, no, who was he? He said, Charles Lindbergh.
Charles Lindbergh?
Charles Lindbergh, yeah. And I said, Charles Lindbergh? God, couldn't be. He was born and raised in Sauk Center, Minnesota. Just 8 miles from my home. I should be able to recognize him. He's quite a little older than I was. But I didn't recognize him. I didn't know who he was until somebody told me. So later I found that Charles Lindbergh came out there and took Geiger counter measurements at ground zero on that particular trip. That was really strange. That didn't appear in our newspapers or anything like that.
No. After the war was over, were you transferred to a new unit? Did you get out, or did you continue?
When I came back I went back to my squadron on Naha, and it had already been shipped back to the States. We stayed in Japan for 3 weeks. And then by the time I got back, they were closed. They were packing up and being shipped, and I was on this general's crew on the airplane. So he went to my commander, had my orders extended, assigning me to the 8th Air Force Service Command crew. I became part of that crew then. They had already replaced me as a squadron commander in the group. And I brought the general, came back with the general and Colonel Boyd, Albert Boyd. And Boyd went back to his old job as Chief of Flight Test at the Wright Air Development Center at Wright Field. General Bertrandias, it turned out, was a reserve general that was a vice president of Douglas Aircraft, that had been called to active duty, given an extra star as a reserve general, and given command of the 8th Air Force Service Command specifically to go negotiate the surrender term. We knew the Japanese already knew the Japanese wanted to surrender, and he was going out to make the arrangements. Now the reason Bertrandias was chosen was because his daughter, Bertrandias' daughter, as vice president of Douglas Aircraft, was married to Hap Arnold's son, Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
After 45, how did you get to Alaska? What year was that?
Oh, I went back to Wright Field and joined the flight test unit group at Wright Air Development Center again. And at that time, we had a normal rotational period of 2 years. 2 years in the zone of interior, and then 2 years overseas, and then 2 years in the zone of interior. And I had been back 2 years at flight test when I came up for normal rotational assignment. Now another thing that was working at that time, there were obligations that went with a number of things. With every promotion, if you accepted it, you automatically accepted a 3-year service obligation. You had to stay in 3 years after that as a reservist. So I'm at Wright Field at the Wright Air Development Center, and I come up for normal rotation. And when I was reassigned, when it came, it was assignment to Alaska, which was then considered an overseas base. It was not a territory. It was a territory, but it was not a state.
Was this like in 47?
That was back in 47, 1947. And as a matter of fact, it was only a couple of months after the Roswell incident. And I was at Wright Field at the time, in the Flight Test Center, in the Foreign Technology Division, where all the information on the Roswell crash was being handled, but I was not in the need-to-know loop. So it all went around me. My job was screening the classified documents coming back, captured from the factories in Europe. And I was not in the need-to-know loop on the flying saucer, what they called anomalous aerial phenomena program. So when the Roswell crash happened, they went around me. Other officers in my office handled it, but I didn't know who they were, didn't know what they were handling. That's the way it was compartmented. Nobody knew what anybody else was doing. Everybody had his own desk and his own staff of people working that. So now I come up from my rotational assignment, and when it came, I was assigned out of my specialty as a flight test pilot into an operations specialty in Anchorage, Alaska. And when I got to Anchorage, I found that in addition to being the assistant base operations officer, a flight job on an Army base, now the Air Force is separated from the Army, so we had Air Force officers running the air base, but the Army officers running all the rest of it. And the Air Force was a guest on the base. So I'm now assistant base operations officer, an Air Force officer on an Army base. And one of my additional duties, everybody has primary duty and additional duties. My main additional duty was supervising a team of high-ranking, classified, highly classified civilian technicians from my old base, Wright Air Development Center, that was installing special equipment aboard the B-29s that were flying their target profile missions on Russia. At that time, every B-29 crew had to fly a profile on his, they all had their target folders with them, took them home with them. And every crew had to fly a profile mission once a year. That meant they had to go to Alaska, fly all of the legs over the Arctic ice pack to the last checkpoint, and then they changed the direction and came back the same distance, the same time, from that checkpoint to their target. They turned back and came back over the Arctic ice pack and made a simulated drop. But everybody had to do this. So because this was an operational requirement, it was funded. There were a lot of other programs that wanted funding that didn't get it, that were piggybacked on this required missions of all SAC crews. There was a Coast and Geodetic Service wanted to do mapping, so there was a mapping project piggybacked on that target profile mission program. There was a weather research program piggybacked. There was geomagnetic and geological programs tied on there. Wherewith the B-29s carried special equipment on their simulated bomb run aboard the airplanes, and after they made their simulated drop, they'd go to a grid pattern, an assigned grid, and fly the grid and do mapping and photographing and everything else for another 2 or 3 hours, and then come home with a lot more data than they started out with. And it was from that data that we photographed every inch of the Arctic in daylight with no clouds, from mosaics assembled from all those missions. And my team was installing special equipment aboard B-29, which consisted of additional handheld 16-millimeter cameras. And there was already a 16-millimeter camera in every gun position on the B-29. So we put another 4 16-millimeter handheld cameras for opportunity shots. We put 4x5 press cameras, 4 of those aboard. We put 35-millimeter handheld cameras, 4 of those aboard. They also had a Fairchild K20 camera that took a picture on an 8.5-inch by 10-inch negative in both color and black and white. Then we put magnetic detectors aboard and thermal detectors that would measure changes in ambient heat aboard the airplane. And we got information on all of those pieces of equipment at one time or another when they had experience with this anomalous aerial phenomena, when a craft, an alien craft, got in close enough to them to be recorded. And we had some real interesting approach. We had one that got in a slot behind the trailing edge of the big wing and ahead of the tail wing, about 50 feet out from the airplane, that triggered all the systems. And all the radios went haywire. Electrical systems malfunctioned. Everything on that one. That was the best one. There were other cases where they met an approaching, pulsing, pinkish-orange light from a distance, coming in head-on in seconds and reaching the B-29, stopping and reversing its course to the speed of the B-29 and staying there for 2 or 3 minutes in formation with the B-29, then it would fly away at high speed. And we had reports of one B-29 coming on a 200-foot diameter disc sitting on the ice cap, the Arctic ice cap, that jumped into the air and flew away ahead of them, and it didn't leave anything on the ground behind it, not even a stain in the snow. We couldn't launch a B-29 without having a sea of equipment bigger than the B-29 around it when it taxied out and left. Here, this big thing, bigger than the B-29, jumped into the air on the ice pack, flew away without leaving anything behind. That was really unique and puzzling. They came on one that was sitting on the water, floating on the water, and it submerged and disappeared underwater. They came on another one on the water that took off and flew away from the water. Now, in my view, these were all clearly beyond the characteristic potentials of our technology, and I was sure that they were all alien extraterrestrial vehicles, and I kept insisting that was the case, but I had superiors that would laugh at me and say, they're ours. They're built on this planet. Somebody is building this technology. And I couldn't accept it. Now, with a little more time, more experience, and more evidence, I realized that the Germans did succeed in getting quite a ways with their disc program with the help of visiting alien extraterrestrials. That they built craft at 200 and 300 feet in diameter, that rose and descended vertically, that floated in a gravity field, that when they were under power, they generated a field around the craft, and the Germans discovered that the craft could go underwater and fly underwater and emerge and fly away.
When you were up there and you saw these craft or you photographed them, what year was that again?
That was in 1947 to 1949.
And you were up in Alaska until 49?
47 to 49, yes.
And then you came back after that?
Yeah, when I was up there and collecting this data, I tried to keep some of it for myself or make copies and take it home, and I got caught. My superior said, look, this is government property. You can't take anything home. The orders were to shred and destroy, and that's what you have to do. They said, you are not allowed to possess anything that we collect, that the government collects. It's government property. Then they turned to me and said, well, if you collect anything on your own, that's your business. That's your property, unless you collect it for us. So whatever you collect on your own, we don't care what you do with it. And they were of the opinion that they were dealing with a Russian advancement on the German project. So I started collecting, using their sources for information. When I hear of a reported case in the area, I'd go interview the witnesses myself, and if they had taken pictures, I'd get copies of their pictures. So I was getting copies of original pictures early on, and then I'd get to further down the line, and when people didn't want to give me a copy of their picture, I'd show some I already had, and then they want copies of those, so I'd trade out. And I traded out with everybody I met, so I finally reached the stage where I had more to trade than anybody else, so I could always get everything everybody else had, because I had more than he had, and could keep going. That just gave me a bigger advantage until I had more than anybody else in the world, and it was easy to trade out then with whoever had anything. So I finally got the biggest collection in private hands in the world. I suspect that the government has a lot more than I have. Probably a hangar full of pictures someplace.
They probably got copies of a lot of yours.
They got copies of a lot of the ones that I have, but I think I have copies that they don't have too, because I've had their agents going through my files looking for. When I was in Alaska, they came out with a program authorizing certain reserve officers to apply for regular commissions. So I'd been through 2 reductions in force where they tried to kick me out, and I refused to go. I refused to sign the release papers, and each time I had to write the Secretary of the Air Force to explain why I refused to sign. Both times he had me reassigned elsewhere in the Air Force for another leg. But I'm worried about job security because I didn't want to get out. I was happy with what I was doing. And when they came along with this regular program, they're going to increase the regular forces by a certain amount, and they authorized lieutenant colonels with certain experience levels an opportunity to voluntarily retire from the service with 20. If you had 20 years, you could voluntarily retire. See, when I took my regular commission, I found out that the regulars don't have a retirement plan. Well, they do, but they have to go stay on active duty to the age of 65 before they can retire. And I thought, well, I got job security anyway. I could stay here until I'm 65. But then time came when I didn't think I'd want to stay until I was 65, but I didn't have any way of getting out but except to resign and give up everything. I didn't want to resign because I already had my 20 years for retirement, and by 24 years for retirement, this authorization for voluntary retirement of regulars allowed. It was only like 60 officers were going to be released, and I managed to get in that. I sent my answer in the day the telegram hit the bulletin board, and I got accepted in that list. By then I was already in an upgrade school. I was in an upgrade pilot training school to fly the F-101 Voodoos. And I was right in the middle of the course, and they took me out of the course and took me off flying duty and retired me 2 weeks later. And I'm out. I'm a civilian. With my.
So you didn't get a chance to fly jets?
Oh, I flew jets, but I was going up to the 101, which was one of the latest, hottest ones, and they were just training new pilots to take them over.
What jet aircraft did you fly?
I flew the P-80s and the F-86. Were the first one I flew was the P-80 Shooting Star, and then the F-86, and I was going up from F-86 to F-101. Okay. Could have been 100s also. They were about similar in category to the Voodoo.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you very much, Wendelle, and we've got an hour and 20 minutes in here. I'm sure you want to get up and stretch, and so thank you so much.
Oh, you bet.
The most wonderful and unique thing about Wendelle is that he has been willing to share the knowledge that he learns with everybody and anybody who asks him. And this is so wonderful and so special and so rare. And tonight, he is coming to share a little bit of this knowledge with all of us again, yet again. And it's a rare treat tonight because he's going to talk on a subject that, in truth, for the last, well, I don't know, 8 or 10 years anyway, it's a subject that he has been reluctant to continue talking about. He says, oh, the Meier case, the Pleiadian case, that's old news. We did that investigation, years ago. I've said everything I have to say on it. And that's pretty much where he's left it, and he's moved on to newer stuff. Now, there are generations of people that are now interested in the phenomena, and many of them really don't know much about the Billy Meier case. And right now I'm going to bring Colonel Wendelle Stevens up, and please give him a great round of applause.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? First of all, I want to thank you all for coming to this meeting tonight. I'm going to do this extemporaneously. So I'm going to start from the beginning of the case and go from there and tell you details that have never been published anywhere and events that happened in sequential order as best I can remember them. So with that, Pleiades almost seems like an unpleasant word today, the way it's abused and bandied around and misused, but it's a very important word. The Pleiades are a very prominent star group in our history and mythology. Everything mentions the Pleiades someplace or other. It's in all of the mythological lore of all of the countries of the world, as a matter of fact. So, did this Meier case that is so controversial, did it start with Billy Meier? No. His case didn't start there, and there were other cases of visitors, human beings, coming here from the Pleiades before Mr. Meier's case with them started in 1975. In 1958, there was a man named Lloyd Zerbes up at St. Cloud, Minnesota, who began having contacts with beings who said they came from the Pleiades. And his contacts went on until about 4 years ago when he died of a cancer. And they went on all that time, and these Pleiadians conveyed a lot of information to him. He never wanted to get any public attention. They gave him technical data. They discussed physics and science, many sciences with him, very much like they did with the ones in Switzerland with Billy Meier. The Pleiadians that were visiting Minnesota were not the same Pleiadians as the one visiting Meier. Now, the word Pleiadians was our reference to that group. They have another name for themselves. We call them Pleiadians because they said they came from a star group that we call the Pleiades. Very apt name. The same thing with the others. The others came from the Pleiades, but they came from different star systems in the Pleiades. When we finally tied down the source of the Pleiadians visiting Switzerland, they said they came from a star that we call Taygeta. It's about the fourth brightest star in the 7 bright stars that make up the Pleiades. The case in Minnesota, in that case, the Pleiadians said that they came from a star group that around the major star that we call Alcyone. There's another Pleiadian group that said they came from a star, or human beings that come from what we call the Pleiades, said they came from a system around the star Merope. There was a Pleiadian case in South America involving an attorney, Enrique Castillo Rincon, who participated in a metaphysical study group, and beginning first with telepathic contact and then going on from there with some sightings. And then they were invited telepathically to to choose a representative in that group for a meeting with those human beings who said they came from the Pleiades. Now, they didn't tell them initially this. This came out in the discussions later. But they chose Enrique Castillo Rincon to represent the group, and he followed the instructions, went out into a remote area south of Colombia, about 12 miles south of Bogota, Colombia, and met human beings who got out of a big spaceship and talked to him. They invited him aboard, and he went, and he had several subsequent visits aboard the spacecraft. That's another entire story in itself, and that began in the middle 60s, also before the contacts with Billy Meier began. So those are 3 cases. There are a couple more that I am aware of, and 2 of them began before the Meier case. So we can't say that they are copying Billy Meier. We might say that he's copying them, but he was not there, and the information on 2 of those cases was never published. So the thing of interest here is, when did it all begin? It looks to me like the Meier case didn't start with the Pleiades. It started with another group that identified him when he was, actually, there's evidence that it started when he was a baby, when he was dying of pneumonia in the crib, and he was given up for dead. The doctor left, said he won't live until morning. And miraculously, he was breathing well in the morning, and he had almost fully recovered. Later, the Pleiadians mentioned their saving his life at that time. He didn't know anything about this, of course. And when they mentioned it to him, he went back and asked his parents if there was something strange about the early days of his birth, and they told him yes, he had a miraculous survival. So that was the first clue that he got that there was direct interference in his life. At about the age of 8, there was a direct contact where he and his father saw an object pass, a disc-shaped object, pass at low level over a field where they were working. He asked his father about it, and his father said, "Oh, it must be one of those new German weapons." They live right across the border from Germany, and they could see the bombers bombing the city right across. And they wrote it off, but he thought that that couldn't be the case because it was huge. It was a large disk flying at low level. Then later, a few years later, when he was about 10 or 11 years old, now he's seen things in the sky ever since. He got to where he could look up, and he could see them in the daylight in the deep sky. He could look through the blue and see them up there, and he knew they were there. And then he saw them at night also. Then another close approach, and a pear-shaped metallic, silvery gold metallic craft landed in a field in front of him. A door opened, and an old man got out and invited him to come aboard. And he did at that time, and when he got in the ship, he noticed that they took off because the ground receded from them, but he wasn't afraid. The old man talked to him very gently, and he set him down in a chair there, in a seat, put a helmet of some kind over his head, a big helmet with lights and wires and things going into it, lights on it. And in a few minutes' time, they inculcated a vast amount of knowledge in his head, just pumped in somehow into his subconscious mind. And then after that happened, triggering events would awaken realization of some of these things that he knew, but he didn't know how he knew them. So with the knowledge that was instilled in his mind, he was able to attend school, although he attended very seldom because he was the poorest, among the poorest of the boys in the school. And because he didn't have shoes and he didn't have new clothes and things for school, the more affluent boys picked on him, and they would set him up as the butt of pranks. They would pull a joke on the teacher, make it look like Meier did it, and he would frequently get punished for it. And the time came when this seemed to be a regular thing, and the boys took pride in getting it over on Meier. He began to think, well, if the teacher can't see through this, and the boys are getting away with it, then I really am superior to them because I know both. I know they're doing it, and I know the teacher doesn't understand this, and he'd take his punishment and say nothing. But because of this, he didn't go to school very often. And he got to where in his fourth year, I think he only attended school something like 26 days, and in the fifth year, 17 or something like that, in fifth grade. And they passed him out of the fifth grade to get him out of there because they regarded as a troublemaker, and he never went back to school after that. So he doesn't have much of a formal education, but he has a pretty good mind for any of those that have read the stuff that he translates from the contact notes. And he became, because he left school early, of course, the truant officers were looking for him too. He went to work on a farm, and he drove a tractor, he did a number of things. Because of his reputation in the school, it kind of rubbed off, and he didn't have the best reputation in the town of Bulak, where he was raised and lived. And the time came when they thought that they'd lock him up because he was the troublemaker in town, and they took him to the local mental hospital. He escaped from there the first day by using simple things in his cell, and they picked him back up again, put him back in there, and put him in an isolation cell on the second floor with a high window, and locked him in. And it only took him 2 days to figure out how to, with things available in the cell, to make a way to loosen the bars and get out through the window. And he let himself out the window and dropped 2 stories to the ground, injured his ankle, and made his way to the Rhone River, or the Rhine River that went past there. As soon as he heard them starting to search for him, they got dogs and they chased him to the river, and he jumped in and floated down the river to the French border, where he went ashore and trying to get help for an ankle that's now badly swollen. Somebody referred him to the French police, who suggested that he could get medical treatment at the Foreign Legion office. They recruited him into the French Foreign Legion, and he was assigned to Algeria for training. Now, that's the worst of the outposts in the French Foreign Legion, and it's a tough place to be, and all your old Foreign Legion stories are based on the Algerian outpost, but that's where he was. And he was there for a time. He made friends easily. He was a congenial fellow, but now he had better clothes than he had had before, and he was eating better, and he tired of it. In a few months' time, and decided he was going to leave. Well, the old sergeant of his troop said, "You can't leave. Nobody ever leaves here alive." And he said, "But I'm going anyway." And the old sergeant said, "Well, if you're going, let me give you a piece of advice. Get to water as soon as you can. Nobody else makes it across the desert alone." And he took another man with him, and he ended up having to carry the other man a long ways. He got a long ways from the Legion outpost. They never did catch up to him, and he was at the point of death from lack of water when he came over a hill and he found an oasis, and they survived. He joined a caravan from there and traveled with the caravan, learning their customs,
learning their religion, how they thought, how they believed, and that sort of thing. So he had a very colorful beginning, and about this time, the old man that had been training him, or about shortly before this, the old man said that he visited him for the last time, and he said, "I won't see you anymore. Another teacher will take over. Another instructor will take over." And it was some months, I think, before he heard the voice of the new instructor. It was a female voice. It turned out to be a human being, again, who called herself Asket. She said she came from what she called the doll universe, and that her mission was to help prepare him, to educate him for a future task. Now, it was Asket who led him through all of the major religions, one by one, where he lived in those societies. He learned their religion. He became a Sunday school teacher, or the equivalent of a Sunday school teacher in several of them. He worked his way across the desert with a salt caravan or a camel caravan. He got to the Red Sea. He was captured by pirates, and he was imprisoned or aboard a pirate ship for a time. They put him ashore in Turkey, and he made his way across the Middle East there to India, where he lived in an ashram for a year. So he has a very colorful background. Now, strangely, last month in New York, was almost a year ago in New York, I was at a Whole Life Expo, and I was late because my airplane was late. I had to take a taxi in to the hotel because nothing else would get me there in time, and I ran up the stairs and was running down the corridor. There's a man on the platform like this, trying to hold it until I got there. And as I ran down the corridor, a lady grabbed my arm and said, "I got to see you after this." And I said, "Okay, when I get off, I'll talk to you." And when I came out, she was waiting again, and she introduced herself. She said, "My name is Phobal Chang." And she said, "I was a 10-year-old girl in the ashram where Meier was living at the time, and I would like to tell you a little bit about what we knew of Mr. Meier there." She had a little 8-year-old brother at the time. She was a granddaughter of the head of the ashram. Her family lived there. They liked Mr. Meier because they spoke a little bit of English. Meier spoke English. He spoke some Hindi also. But they liked Mr. Meier because he had a pet monkey. And he would let the little boy play with the monkey and make him do tricks. The monkey could do some marvelous tricks. And so she remembered him very, very well. And we were sitting at a table in the Pennsylvania Hotel in New York, and she said, but the villagers around there kind of regarded him as strange. And I said, "Strange? What do you mean strange? What, they think he was crazy?" She said, "Oh no, they didn't think he was crazy." She said they thought that he was in touch with a celestial woman, or he's being visited by a celestial woman, because some of the eyes around the ashram there's a lot of eyes in India, had seen him taking pictures of the spacecraft, and had even seen him talking to the occupant of the spacecraft outside of it on the ground in India. Now this was a corroboration I'd never heard of before. I didn't know that Meier had a monkey. I didn't know that he knew a 10-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy there in the ashram. I didn't know who ran the place or anything else. So I wrote Mr. Meier a letter, and I asked him if he knew somebody by the name of Phobal Chang, and did he have a monkey? And he said yes. He wrote back a very nice letter. He said, "Yes, I had a monkey. I named him Emperor Hanuman." Hanuman is the name of the monkey king in mythology, in the Oriental mythology. And he said, yes, he did a lot of tricks. He said he could do a lot of tricks. He said, I've always wondered what happened to those kids, the boy and his sister. He said, I think of them every once in a while. And how did you find them? And could you put me in touch with them? So I did. And on our way back to, the Phobal Chang now is a diplomat in the United Nations. She represents her country, Cambodia, as an international diplomat. She was going back to her country on for rebriefing additional information, and I gave her Mr. Meier's address, and she went to see him, and he welcomed her. He took her around with him for several days. When he went to the doctor, he took her along there, renewing old acquaintances. And she came back and said she had the most marvelous visit and renewing of acquaintances with the man. And she said, he is really a spiritual man. They regarded him as a spiritual man when he was in the ashram. So that was interesting, because I didn't have that information before. I didn't even know for sure that he'd been to India, except I had some photographs that were given to me by somebody else one time that was a copy of a picture that was published on the front page of the New Delhi newspaper, and it showed 8 luminous spots in the sky over the railroad station. It was taken before a crowd of 2,000 people at the railroad station. They're waiting for a train to come in India. They get on the train, they hang on the sides, they ride on the top and everything else. And they was waiting for a train to come in, and these things gyrated all over the station there for a number of minutes, enough time for word to get to the New Delhi newspaper that there was a craft over the railroad station, unusual aircraft, and they sent a reporter to the station to do the story. He got there, people in the crowd pointed out Meier as a man with a camera that had taken the pictures, and the reporter went to Meier and asked him if he could borrow the film, and Meier gave him a roll of film. He took it back to the newspaper office, developed it, and they printed 2 pictures on the front page of the New Delhi Times and sent the pictures and negatives to Mr. Meier after that. So I asked Meier about the pictures, and he showed me other pictures that he had taken in India, about a dozen he had. And I even published some of those in the first book I had, but I didn't have a lot of information on them. So in this letter, when I asked him about the pictures and about the monkey and about the kids, he said, I took over 300 photographs in India at that time of the spacecraft flying, maneuvering above and around the ashram and the railroad station in New Delhi City. And he said, I had all those pictures. I kept contact notes. He said I had good contact notes on those contacts. There were scores of contacts with the woman who called herself Osket from the doll universe. And he carefully guarded his notes, but he sent copies of important ones out to a few friends in Europe. He also sent copies of some of the pictures. When he was coming back from India, he was unemployed all this time, so he's making his living by working at whatever he can do as he goes around the country. He was a snake catcher, he was a veterinarian, he dug graves, he begged for a living, everything you can imagine to keep body and soul together. And on his way back from the ashram now, he's carrying some baggage. He's got his contact notes, and he's got his photographs, and he's got some clothes and things that he'd accumulated there. And he accepted a job with American drug enforcement people, intelligence agents pursuing a drug running ring in Turkey. And he infiltrated the ring, the Turkish ring, and was arrested with them when they were arrested coming across the border into Jordan. Was thrown into jail with the rest of the ring, punished, beaten, and they took all of his things away. And when we finally got him released, they just opened the door and told him to go and don't look back. He didn't get anything back. He carried with him, he lost his contact notes, he lost his pictures, he lost everything in Jordan. So he doesn't have a whole lot of record of what happened in India. He only has what he was able to recover from friends in Europe that he had sent out while he was there, and that's 3 or 4 of the contact notes and about a dozen or more of the pictures. So, how did I get involved in all of this? I was collecting UFO photographs, been doing that for a long time, and probably a dozen years or more before this, and I had over 2,000 pictures in my file, photographs of UFOs. And I had been exchanging UFOs with UFO collectors, investigators all over the world, and I had a lot of contacts. One person that I was exchanging information with was Lou Zinstag in Switzerland. She was a multilingual journalist who published the first UFO journal in Europe in German in Basel, Switzerland. It was her area where this was all taking place, and shortly after Meier got back with the first pictures taken on the 28th of January 1975, they came to the attention of Lou Zinstag. She went to see him, and she found a poor farmer living as a guard on a property, a caretaker on a property that was not being occupied by the owners. And it was a very simple family, a man with a wife and 2 or 3 children they had at the time. She talked to him about the case and about the pictures that he had been taken. And her first question, she was a devout fundamentalist Christian. And one of the first questions she asked him was about, did they have Jesus Christ? And he said, no, they don't have that concept. there. They don't have their creation is not personified in our image. It's not like us. So this turned her off a great deal, because this flies in the face of her basic religion, and she's an older lady, and she didn't want to give that up. So she said, well, I like the man. He's a simple man, but he doesn't have Jesus Christ. The beings may not be all that good. But he gave her about 12 of the pictures at the time. And she took the 12 pictures back home, and she wrote me and told me that she had something very interesting to show me, and she thought that she ought to show them to me personally, that she was going to come to the United States in 2 weeks, and if I'd meet her at the bus station, she would bring them with her. So a few weeks later, 2 weeks later, I met them at the bus station. They called me from New York and told me which bus they were on. And when they arrived, it was Lou Zinstog and Timothy Good traveling together. And they were on their way. They were bringing the pictures to show me of the Meier case, 12 of them. But they were also basically here to do their own investigation of the Adamski case. And they were interested in investigating what could still be investigated of the Adamski case. And they were on their way to Vista, California to talk to any of Adamski's old neighbors and relatives that might still be around there. So my contact began with Lou Zinstog, but after 2 or 3 letters she said, this is too much, I can't keep up with it all. I'm going to refer you to another friend of mine, a multilingual journalist, Ilse von Jacobi, who has written an article on Adamski, and she'll be glad to translate a few of your letters. So I sent a couple of them through Ilse von Jacobi, and she would translate them to German, send them to Meier, and Meier would write an answer in German. They'd go to Ilse von Jacobi or Lou Zinstog, and they'd translate them again into English and send them to me. And finally, this got to be an awful long process. More pictures were coming each time, and it was beginning to look like there was a lot more. They told me there were over 300 at that point. And I thought, my God, this is going to take forever. I'll just have to go over there. And about that time, I got my income tax refund back, bought tickets, and went to Switzerland to find him. When I left, I didn't have an address for him or not. My addresses were to Lou Zinstog and Ilse von Jacobi. So when we got to Germany, I went to Ilse von Jacobi's house and asked her to take me to Meier. So she said, okay, but after we got to Switzerland and Zurich, she said, you know, I don't really know where he lives because I've never been here before, but I think we can find it. So we started out from Zurich, and if you've ever been to Switzerland, there's little tiny street signs there with points on the end that identify all the streets. We couldn't find any signs that said anything about Schmidrudi. They had moved by that time, and they were in the location they're in now. So I had another lady with me who said claimed she was psychic, and Ilse von Jacobi, of course, said she was psychic. They said, we can find him. So we're driving a rented car in Switzerland. They said, turn here. And I say, are you sure? Turn here. There's no sign that says anything about where we're going. We just turned. And you know, we drove right up to Meier's house and parked in his driveway right in front of the place. And then Ilse says, I believe that's the house. I think that's Mrs. Meier looking out the window. And we went up, sure enough. That was it. So that was the first indication we had that there was some other kind of outside influence involved here. We didn't know how we got there. And this is an example, though, of how these things happen. We call it synchronicity, but you'll find later that there's a whole lot more to this than that simple synchronicity. When I sat down in front of Mr. Meier, at his coffee table, which is a big oak door with 4 legs on the corners, and they fixed us a cup of coffee, and I sat down there on one side with Ilse von Jacobi to do my translating, and Meier on the other side, and I said, I'm sure glad to finally get here and talk to you across the table. I'm tired of these letters. And he answered, I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Stevens, and I am glad you're here. Now, my translator said he couldn't speak a word of English, and here he's just done it. He answered me in English. So I looked at her, and her mouth is open, and she's looking at me, and she said, but he doesn't speak any English. I said, he just did. So then I tried to talk slowly and simply, and most of his answers were in English, and occasionally he would answer in German, and she would translate that. Now, every question I asked him, he looked me right in the eye, right straight in the eye, never wavered. He was a simple man. I discovered soon on that he wouldn't tell a lie for any reason in the world. He claimed he was an anti-materialist. He wouldn't own anything. He didn't carry any money in his pockets. He didn't have any personal possessions but his moped which somebody had given him, and he had a broken camera that somebody had tossed away that he had fished out of the salvage someplace and had it. That's what he was taking the pictures with. This camera had the lens, the focus adjustment on the lens. The ring was jammed. It had been dropped, and it was jammed just a little bit short of the infinity setting. And the mirror, it had a window beside the lens. It was not through the lens focusing. It was the kind that has the window on the side. And it has a mirror in it to give you the correct parallax so you could shoot a decent picture with it. The drop had broken the mirror loose. You couldn't even look through it anymore. So he shot his pictures by holding his camera out this way because he couldn't look through it anyway. And with a focus adjustment he couldn't control, and he used one light setting. He used f11. He shot everything at f11 and 125th of a second on ASA 100 film. All those beautiful pictures were shot that way. That's how good a photographer he was. He really didn't know anything about photography at the time, and he didn't care. His camera worked, and he could use it. Now, after he had taken the first few sets of pictures, friends tried to give him better cameras. And he took the better cameras with him and tried to use them, but he couldn't work them with one hand. The little one that he had rescued from the salvage was a small Japanese Ricoh-type camera that he could do everything. He could hold the camera in one hand, roll the film, snap the pictures, and everything else, and he always went back to that. He just couldn't use the bigger cameras. So here I find a man who is taking beautiful pictures of UFOs. He got one arm. He lost one in an accident, and he can only do this with one arm. He's taking these marvelous pictures with good scenery that look like somebody posed the ships and everything else. And the composition was even good. There were marvelous pictures. And he didn't know anything about photography. He's using a broken camera. And I'm thinking, he's getting some help someplace. But I took the pictures. I brought them home from that trip, and I started looking for somebody to do some analysis on them. I knew that Ground Saucer Watch was testing pictures and claimed they had a way to do this. So I went to Ground Saucer Watch first. They didn't have time to mess with me. They looked at them and said, yeah, they're fakes. And I thought, well, they don't know enough about them, or they wouldn't be saying that. So we started looking for somebody with an open mind. And we were looking for, we had other evidence too at the time. I had a piece of metal, I had a number of things, and we were looking for a scientist who had an open mind, probably a cross-disciplinary scientist that wasn't locked into peer pressure in any particular field. And we found this in the case of Mr. Jim Dilatoso. Didn't even have a degree. But Jim Dilatoso had gone to school until he was 28 years old. He had gone to college long enough to have gotten a half a dozen degrees if he had decided to specialize in anything and wrote the papers. But he liked going to school. He was what we call a professional student. He liked going to school. His family could afford it. He just kept going to college, taking more subjects, more subjects, more subjects. He'd taken all the electives, and I was taking all the sciences. And so when we started talking to Dilatoso and trying to figure out how are we going to get a hold of this, how are we going to analyze this material, he says, well, let's start with the experts. So he went to Ground Saucer Watch and talked to them, asked them how they were doing this. We found that they were bootlegging their time on a computer, an old computer with a minimum 5-micron window, which is big for a computer. And the computer was one that was used to analyze flaws in castings for jet engines. And they were doing it at night on that computer, and they were using 4 steps that didn't show them anything. So Dilatoso immediately recognized that this is not scientific. They're eyeballing it and making the computer say what they want it to say, and then writing up a little story describing what was going on and getting away with it. So we talked to Bill Spaulding's second-hand man, asked him if we could get a look at the equipment. So we did, and we found out that it was manufactured by Spatial Data Systems at Goleta, California. So we went out to Spatial Data Systems to find out what they knew about the system. And they said, oh yeah, this system, they came out here and looked at it. They said a man came in here and looked over our equipment and gave us this 4-point program for analysis. He gave us a name, it's a very famous name today in UFO research. But they said that what we really needed to do was find out a way to do what we wanted to do, that the procedure that was being used wasn't the best. We said, well, can you demonstrate it? So they went to their showroom where they had a new model of the same equipment that was being used by Air Research in Phoenix, and they took the shade off from a lamp on a table, turned the 100-watt bulb over the picture we laid on the table, picked up a Panasonic home video, about a $1,200 job, and holding it by hand like this, shot the picture to get it into memory, and then transferred that to the computer, and then that's what they analyzed. Well, right away they lost everything because they didn't have a stable mount. They're holding it by hand. They had incandescent light, 100 watts, and it was reflected from a thing on a table. There was no light table. There was no filters. The resolution on the camera itself was so bad it couldn't have shown anything anyway. So we thought, gee whiz, what are we up against here? This is no way to test anything. We've got to find a better way. So the people at Goleta said, go over to JPL. They're the ones that are making these beautiful pictures from this fuzzy image data that's coming back from the satellites, and maybe they can tell you how to do it. So we did. We went over to JPL, and we introduced ourselves at the front office, and we were ushered back into the office of Frank Bristow, who was the administrative supervisor of the JPL visitor's office at the time. And of course we had to sign in on the sign-in book and everything else to do this. To get in there at all, you have to do that. So we showed him the pictures, and he scratched his head and multiple. We wanted to talk to their image sciences people, the ones that were making good pictures out of the bad ones coming back from space. And he scratched his head and he said, well, he said, first of all, I want you to go out and sign out on the book and then come back to the office here. So we did, and then we went back into his office, and he pulled out his middle drawer in the desk, and he gave us internal badges. He says, use these, and when you go, give them back to me. Don't sign in or out anymore. Don't carry your cameras. No tape recorders, and I'll take you down to the Imaging Sciences Division. He took us down to see Bob Nathan, who later denied that we'd ever been there. But we were ushered into Bob Nathan's office, and we showed him the pictures, and he looked at them, and he said, oh, they look too good to be true. He said, they're probably fakes. We said, well, can you tell us how we could fake these? He thought a little bit, and he said, well, I don't know. Anything I think of just doesn't quite fit. He said, well, we can take a look at them. So and we're talking about UFO pictures now, and he says, these may be fakes, but he says, he pulled open his left drawer over here in his desk, top of his desk, and pulled out 4 pictures, and he says, these are real. I can tell you these are real because I've tested them exhaustively. Now, the pictures that he pulled out and handed us were the pictures, the Heflin pictures, photographed at Santa Ana, California, that disappeared 5 years before that, and everybody thought the Navy stole them. Here he's got them in his upper left-hand drawer in his desk, and they were the original Polaroids taken with the county camera. And he's tested them. He says, these are real. He put them back in his desk. So he said, come on with me, and we'll go down to Bob Post downstairs and have him make copies of the pictures. We had 4 pictures. Now, before we started testing, we decided that we would do the best we could, but we couldn't test them all. So we would pick the best picture in a series, in a sequence of 4 different sequences, 4 different pictures, from 4 different sequences, and the best of the lot for testing, the one that had the most image data in it. And that's what we were carrying with us to Bob Post's laboratory. And that's what we went downstairs and rephotographed, and he made negatives and positives and everything else and gave them back to us. And they ran their own testing, and they said, we can't give anything out of here. We're not in that business, but we'll tell you how we're doing it, and you can go to the manufacturer of the same equipment array. They were using De Anza equipment at JPL at the time, and we copied the model numbers off from everything that they used, and went to the De Anza factory where we set up another line and duplicated what they did the way they told us they were doing it to get the first image data report we had on the pictures, which turned out to be a pretty good one. There were things that developed in this case as we were going that were unbelievable. First of all, when I got there the first time, Mr. Meier took me around to a number of the photographic sites, and we walked over them, and I could see right away that this is going to be difficult to suspend models in. You can't throw them in, you can't shoot them in, you can't. The terrain would slope down steeply like that for 1,000 feet. And the pictures were taken of the object out over the valley. The other side of the valley comes up 5 miles away. So there's no way they could be suspended. And I called Lee and Tom, who had from Intercept. They were friends of mine in Phoenix with a little intelligence business, and they were performing debugging, electronic debugging of telephone systems and bank computer systems. And they were doing a job in London for some London banks, and they were there at the time. And I called them and said, you got to come over here and see what I'm seeing. This guy couldn't have faked these. And up to this point, I thought there may have been a way to do it. And I said, there's no way that can be done. So they came over the next day, and we walked over the sites again, drove over them. And looking at them once more, they said, well, this is going to take some sophisticated equipment, but we can work it out. We'll rent laser surveying instruments so we can measure distances across valleys, and we'll take pictures, we'll try to duplicate it, we'll make models and suspend them into the scene and all these things. And we went to a number of sites, and they came away. They said, we don't do this business, but this is interesting, because if he's faking it, he's got a new technique, and we're going to find out about it. Now, these men were licensed private investigators in the state of Arizona. They also had international licenses, which they were using in London, already had business in Zurich. And so we did. We rented laser surveying instruments to shoot distances across valleys. We could measure distance, we could measure levels, we could measure elevations, we could measure a lot of things. And we brought the data back to Jim De La Tosa, and using the geometry of the lens and the distances that we measured, we could calculate the approximate size of the craft very easily. From the photographs, with other techniques, we could tell whether they were moving or not, which direction they were moving. So now we were building a database that was very interesting and becoming quite exciting. So now I've had them over there, and this is my second trip. And we came back from there, and they agreed, although this was not the business of Intercept, and they shouldn't get involved in anything as kooky as this, if we could keep it low level, that they would help me conduct the investigation. And once they agreed to do this over the telephone, things began to change. We began to be followed every place we went. Our telephones were tapped. At first, this was very disturbing, because they didn't know why it was being done. Why would... If our government denies the existence of UFOs, why are they tapping our phones and following us around? I was followed so often, I knew which cars were the cars that were doing the following. I could recognize them, and they would stay, they'd keep at least one car between me and them all over town and wherever we went, any place. So when we were going to have a meeting to discuss something, Lee would call me at home, and he'd say, go to a public telephone and call me back at such and such a number in 5 minutes. If you don't make it in 5 minutes, go back home, wait for another call. I'd go do that call him from the grocery store in front of the Circle K or whatever I could, and he'd say, meet me at the usual place. By the time I got halfway across town, my green Cadillac, or Lincoln, it was a green Lincoln sedan, would be behind me. It was driven by a man who once ran for county attorney in the city of Tucson. He was always there. He's an elderly man, wore a nice business suit, gray hair, but I couldn't shake the guy, and they had relays too. They could pass it off. So I'm telling Lee, why are they doing this? If there's nothing to this, why is this going on? And so we used to meet at Picacho. It's a landmark between Tucson and Phoenix, where we could go up the side of a hill and see everything below us coming from every direction. And we found that later they had even bugged the site where we're meeting. We gave too much away. So now a time came when we're going back for the second trip, and we've talked about it a couple of times on the phone, and then we went to these strange secrecy techniques, like kids, trying to get away with something, and we decided that they decided they would join me in the investigation, which now is going to be a deviation from their pattern. And a few days after that, about 10 days after that, Lee got a letter in the mail from the Knights, with the return address on the corner said the Knights Templars of Malta, and it came from London. It was an airmail letter. And inside, on engraved parchment, was a typed letter that said, we believe we have interests in common. Please, and that you may be coming to Europe in the near future, please contact us by telephone. Well, we decided we wouldn't contact them by telephone. We didn't need any help. And what were they talking about? We hadn't a good idea what they were talking about, but we were not going to tell anybody. We were trying to keep the whole thing secret. So we didn't respond. We didn't respond, and 2 weeks later we got another letter in the mail. This time it came on House of Lords stationery, engraved stationery again. Now the first letter from the Knights Templars of Malta was signed, after the brief little 2-paragraph message, was signed Mark Nathan, Secretary General of the Knights Templars of Malta. We reject that. We don't do anything about it. The next one that came on House of Lords stationery, and it's a letter inside the same way. And this one was another invitation. Says you didn't respond to our last letter. We still are interested in a communication. Please contact us as soon as you get to London. Now we hadn't told anybody we were going to London. I hadn't even told my daughters I was going to London. So we decided to ignore that one too. Now this letter on the House of Lords stationery was signed again, Mark Nathan, Secretary before the Rod, or something like that it was. It's a strange secretary title that's used in the House of Commons in London. And now he's got our curiosity, because it's the same name and the same signature on 2 different important letterheads. So we decided we would wait until we got out of Switzerland and call him on the way back. We didn't want anybody to know where we were or what we were doing. And these guys, because they were private investigators, always insisted on the greatest secrecy. I mean, they went to great pains to obscure everything that we were doing. And so we bought the cheapest tickets possible on Laker Airlines, it was at the time, and went to London in tourist class, steerage class in the back, and got off at the London airport and caught the subway. Now, how can anybody follow you on the subway? We caught the subway into town and got off at Victoria Station. Now, there's the subway runs every 10 minutes. So if anybody's going to be able to pick something out, it's going to be tough. We got off the subway at Victoria Station and are going to the street to take a taxi cab to an old gunnery sergeant's house where we were going to stay. A friend that we had met before, who had a walk-up. He was renting rooms in his walk-up. We weren't even staying in a hotel. And we came out of down the railroad platform heading for the taxi exit, and a big, tall, black cabbie, London cabbie, comes up to us, tapped Lee on the shoulder, and says, "You're Mr. Elders?" Lee said, "Yes." He said, "Come with me." We said, we're going to take a taxi. We're tired. We want to go get some sleep. We have reservations. He said, "I have your reservations." So we thought, well, maybe the old gunner sergeant has sent him down there. So we got in his cab, put our bags in there, and he didn't drive us the direction we were going. We wanted to go out of London, and he took us right downtown London, around Hyde Park, and parked in front of the Grosvenor House. The Grosvenor House is a big apartment hotel on Hyde Park, right on the side of the Hyde Park, that looks at the American Embassy on one side and the Russian Embassy on the other. And he parked in front, said, "I'll lock the bags in the car, come with me," and he locked everything in there. We went in the lobby. He motioned to somebody, and another man came along. We got on an elevator, took us up to the 3rd floor, and he's not giving us any opportunity to refuse or anything else. Now, there were some bars that could be drawn across at that time. I thought they were fire protection, but they may have been something else. Anyway, we got through, and we got off the elevator on the 5th floor, walked down to room number, I think it was 520 on the left-hand side. He knocked on the door, opened it. There was a man with spectacles and business suit behind the door. He said something to him, then motioned us in. It was a kind of a wet bar. There was a refrigerator, there was a little hot plate on one side, there was a sink, things like that, and another door on the other side of this little entryway. He went to that and opened it up and ushered us into a big sitting room. Big sitting room. It was about, for London, it was immense. It was about 20 feet one direction by 10 or 12 the other direction. And in that room was a large overstuffed sofa, four seats, 4-cushion one, a big one, and a big heavy coffee table. And then on the other side, to the left of it, was a shorter love seat type, 2-cushion sofa. And over in the corner over here was a big black overstuffed chair with the big black fat arms and a little table on each side, on each arm. And on that side, facing the big lounge, the big sofa, were the picture windows, full wall of picture windows that looked out on Hyde Park. And we were introduced to Mark Nathan. And he's standing in front of this big, fat, black, overstuffed chair, and he smiles and he motions us to sit down, you know. So I sat down on the big sofa. Lee and Britt were near the small one. They sat down on the two-cushion sofa. And he sat down, and I started to pull my pants up over my knees like that so they wouldn't be uncomfortable. And about that time, the white telephone on his right-hand side rang 10 short rings. Now, immediately, we knew what that was because we had been in Meier's house at a time when the Pleiadians would ring his telephone 10 short rings to let him know that what he was thinking was them and not his own thoughts. Early on, he wasn't clearly able to distinguish between telepathic transmissions and his own thoughts. And then, in that case, they would signal him 10 short rings on his telephone. Now, no telephone in the world can ring 10 short rings because there's only 6 lobes on the cam. You can get any combination of 6, but you can't get 10. And we took his telephone apart to be sure of this, and he had the same kind of a phone. It's a bunch of rotary cams, and it can't be rung short. You can't get 10 rings of any kind. So here, and we'd heard this in Meier's house, so here we're sitting in front of this Mark Nathan, who we don't know who he is at the time. And his phone rings 10 short rings, and he said, he tried to answer it, and there was nobody on the line. And he said, hello, hello, and he tried, and he says, well, that's strange. He said, and I looked at Lee, and Lee and Britt looked at me, and we know what it is. We say, have you ever heard a ring like that before? He said, that was kind of strange, wasn't it? Lee said, do you think it rung 10 times? And he said, well, maybe. And he said, I'll find out. And he picked up his phone, and he called down to the desk. He said, who rang? They said, no calls to your room. He said, could anybody call this room from any place else in the hotel? And they said, not without going through the switchboard. There's been no calls to your room. And there were some more questions, and he put it down and shook his head and started to talk, and the red phone on the other side rang 10 short rings. So he says, I'll find out about this. And he picked it up and said, hello. There's nobody on there. And he says, this is a secure phone. It's monitored 24 hours a day. Nobody can dial in here that doesn't have a certain security clearance. He says, I'll find out about this. And he asked that operator, and he said, no, you haven't had any calls, no lights on the board, nobody's called you. And he put it back up, and then he introduced himself, and he said his name was Mark Nathan, that he was the case officer for the London District. That's CIA case officer for the London District. That means he's in charge of the whole London District, and we're sitting in his office, and he's Mark Nathan, and he signed these 2 fake documents, the letter from the Knights Templars of Malta and the letter from the House of Commons in London. And then he proceeds to tell us that they're interested in what we're doing, that they haven't been able to get a man inside, and they wondered if we would talk to him on the way out. So we said, sure, we'll talk to you. And he wished us well and sent us on our way. They told us what they knew about the case, and we probably talked to him no more than 10 minutes, and he sent us downstairs, and he sent us to our residence in a big limousine, which probably surprised all the neighbors because the gunnery sergeant lived in a very poor neighborhood of London. And then, after that, every time we went in and out, we were picked up by the CIA, taken to his office, and we were either asked what we were going to do going in, or we were asked what we did when we came out. And if we were carrying pictures or anything, they asked to see them, and when we handed them to them, they'd take them out, and they'd bring them back 15 or 20 minutes later. We'd talk about various things, and we finally had been to his office so many times, we were getting to be on a first-name basis. We called him Mark, and he called us by first names. About the 4th time we came out, he said, look, he said, my wife would like to fix you dinner tonight. Can you come by for dinner? So we said, sure. He said, I'll send the limo to pick you up. We're staying at the gunnery sergeant's place again. He said, I'll send the limo to pick you up about 5 o'clock. That'd be okay? And we said, sure, that's fine with us. So the limo arrived, and we got in it, and we went to his house, and he introduced us to his wife. His wife was an ethnic Chinese lady who was a Chinese intelligence agent. Sun Chi Li, are you here? She was a Chinese intelligence agent before Mark Nathan met her. Mark Nathan was an American intelligence agent, and we came to the conclusion that it was a marriage of convenience. It gave us a channel into their operations and gave them a channel into ours. Why this had to be the Chinese, I don't know. But she was very gracious. She fixed a wonderful Chinese dinner, and we had a nice dinner that was very sociable. We talked about ordinary things. And afterwards, they invited us into their living room to have tea. And we sat down on the sofa and the chairs there, and things were proceeding very friendly when Mark Nathan got up and he said, you know, I got something you'll be interested in. And he went to the table at the end of the sofa I was sitting on. It was a round end table with a lamp on it and some flowers. And he went to the end of the table at the end, and he took the flowers off, set it on the floor, took the lamp off and set it on the floor, and picked up the table, and it was a shell. And under the shell was a safe. He knelt down, he says, don't look at me while I turn. Of course, he had his back between us and the numbers. And he twirled the dial, and he opened the safe, swung the door open, and he says, come here. And we went over there, and he first took out a package of passports and laid them on the floor. There's about 8 or 9 passports tied together with a rubber band. And Lee says, are all those yours? He said, yeah, I travel a lot. So Lee says, well, what countries are they? And he handed them to him. Lee took the rubber band off. There was India. He had a passport from India with his picture and signature, passport from Canada with his picture and signature, passport from a Scandinavian country, an American passport, a diplomatic passport, a security passport from, he had 8 of them, and his name and signature in them all. And Lee says, well, you must do a lot of traveling. He said, I really need them once in a while. And but he was setting things out, and he got down to a paper bag, a grocery bag, about that size. And he took it out, and he said, this is what I'm looking for. And in the course of getting to the bag, he moved a 8.5 by 11 mimeograph booklet that was about a 3/4 of an inch thick, had a blue cover, had a red stripe down from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner. He took it out and laid it on the floor, and then he put some other things on it, and he handed the bag to Lee, and what was in the bag was miniature pickups. There were pickups in there so small that you could take the eraser out of a lead pencil, put the pickup under the eraser, push it back in place. There was a little wire that stuck up along the side. He said, this can transmit as much as 500 feet. But he had things that you could put them in a lot of other things too. And Lee said, boy, that is remarkable. Technology says this is the latest state of the art. So then he showed us a couple other things he showed that he had in there. And then he started putting everything back in, and he put the blue book with the red tape on it in there, and he put the passports on the top and closed the door and twirled the dial and put the shell back over again and the plants back on and the lamp. And we went on talking. And he drove us home in his limousine that night. We walked up our walk up 4 floors to bedroom, and it was near midnight, and we were tired, and I walked in Lee's room with him and Britton, and he started undressing. He took his keys out of his pocket and laid them up on a wardrobe, a standalone wardrobe like that that you put clothes in. Then he dumped all the change in his pocket up there, and he laid some other things down. He started taking his shoes off, and I said, well, I think I'll go to bed. And Britt said, well, we'll see you in the morning. And I heard him lock the door behind me. I went across the hall to my own room. I was right across from their door. The next morning, I get up early. The next morning, I was up about 5 o'clock, and I thought, before I left, I said, hey, I'm going to go down for early breakfast. You know, if we wait too long, there's not much left, so if you want me to wake you up, fine. And Lee said, yeah, get me up, we'll go for a walk. So I get up about 5 o'clock, and I went across the hall and knocked on the door, and I heard a sleepy voice, and he come and unlocked it, and the hair's all over his head, and he's standing there in his shorts, and he said, oh, come on in, I'll get ready, get dressed. So we went in, and I sat down in a little chair beside the sink there, and he went over and got his shirt and put it on, pulled his pants on, and then reached over to get his change and his keys off the wardrobe, and they're not on the metal that he laid them on the night before. They're on top of a 8.5 by 11 blue book, about a 3/4 of an inch thick, with a blue cover and a red tape running from the upper right hand to the lower left hand corner across it. And he looks at it and he says, Jesus Christ, you ever seen this before? And I said, yeah, it was in that safe we looked at last night. He said, yeah. He says, what did it say? We looked at the cover, same thing. He says, oh, we got to call Mark and let him know what happened. Now, we woke Britt up and says, how did this get here? And she says, I don't know, I didn't bring anything back last night. Do you bring anything back? No, we didn't bring anything back. And we're puzzling about this. He said, well, we got to let him know. So we went down to the phone at the landing in the stairs in the hallway, called Mark Nathan, got him out of bed, told him, we've got your blue book. He says, oh, no, you haven't. He says, it's in the safe. He said, well, you better look and see if it's still there, because we got one just like it in the room. So he said, just a minute, I'll take a look. And he came back about less than 5 minutes later, all out of breath, and he says, where did you get it? You haven't looked at it, have you? We said, no, we haven't looked at it. We're not concerned about it. He said, don't look, I promise you, you won't look at it. I'll be right there. And he whistled up in about 12 minutes in his limousine, ran all the way up the stairs, came to the door out of breath, and he says, where is it? And we said, we haven't touched it. It's right there right where we found it this morning. He picked it up and looked at it. He says, Jesus Christ. He says, how did you get it out of the safe? We told him, we don't know. And that was an example of what I call interference that was perpetrated by somebody. That was one example. There were lots of examples. This is what makes this case so credible. You don't have to ask me whether I believe it or not. I try not to assert that it's real because there's a lot of things I don't like to assert. But there are things like this all through the case that make it highly credible to me. The ringing of the telephones, the things coming out of locked safes. We were coming out of there one time with some pictures, 300 pictures that I had bought from Mr. He always insisted on giving them to me, and I didn't want them free, and I'd pay him for the cost of reproducing them. And we're coming out with those, and when we got to the railroad station and got on the train, now we didn't have tickets or passports or anything. I mean, we had passports. We didn't have advanced reservations or anything. We got on a train and rode to the French border, and when you change trains in Switzerland when you go into France, by the time we got to the French border and changed trains and got on a car, there was nobody else on the car. There was a French officer sitting on one end, a police officer, and we got on the car, and we thought he was just monitoring traffic coming in. When the train pulled out, nobody else got on the car. We walked down to the other end. There's another police officer sitting on the other end of the car. And we asked him if there's anything about the car, and he, no. And we rode all the way across France, just 3 people in that whole darn train car with a French officer on each end all the way to the port where we got off to go take the boat train across. Why that was, I'll never know. I've never been on a European train with nobody else on the car but me. And the only thing that was different is we had 300 pictures with us. And the officers never said anything. I don't think they even knew why they were there. And maybe they weren't there for that reason, but it was really peculiar. Another time when we were carrying pictures, we got off in a crowd of people, and you know, Michael, when you get off and you get in a crowd, you get in a long line to go through customs, right? So we got a lot of always carried a lot of stuff. So it takes us longer to get there, and the whole line is ahead of us. And we're way back down the line and thinking we'll never get a seat on the ferry boat because we're too far back. All the seats will be gone. Well, we're standing there talking. Lee gets tapped on the shoulder. It's a French customs officer. Tapped him on the shoulder and says, motion for us to come with him. And we went past all the people in the line. He opened another station to the left that was unmanned. Motioned for us through, checked our passports, stamped them, motioned us on. We got through, and he closed the station and went and left. Now, why that happened, I'll never know. When we got down on the starting platform, we were supposed to catch a certain train and car, we thought, and we asked there's a policeman there, where it was, should have been on this track, and just on that track over there, number 14. So we said, but it's over here. No, on that track over there. But there's our train over there. So we followed him and went over there, and the train pulled out. And we got to our destination okay, but we were on a different train entirely. Well, that time we had some intelligence agents following us that somebody didn't want following us, and they got on the right train, and we're on the wrong train. And the intelligence agents that thought they were on a car we were on got into a fight on a railroad platform in Amsterdam, were arrested and thrown in jail. And when we got to London and we're taking to Mark Nathan's office, he says, what the hell do you do? Whoever taught you to sanitize a trail like that? We said, what do you mean sanitize a trail? He says, how do you give my men the slip? They're the best in the business. We said, we didn't know we gave anybody the slip. He said, 2 men over in jail over there. He had to send 2 more men to get them out. Take them more passports and get them out. Now, why that kind of interference? I mean, why is that happening over a case that is ridiculous? It's a UFO case. The government says they don't exist. And somebody's spending an awful lot of money. They're spending as much money to follow us as we're spending to get there. And this just went on and on all the way through the case. How long have we been going here? Oh, my God. You want a break? You want to stand up and stretch a minute? Okay, let's take about a 5-minute break and just stretch. If you have to go to the bathroom, do so. I was at the house, and Meier had been ill all day. He had the flu, and he hadn't eaten any breakfast, he hadn't eaten any lunch, and it was late in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was pretty weak, had been laying on the sofa all day. And I was standing in front of the television set watching a news program when I heard him make a little noise, and I looked around and he motioned for me to come over to him. So I went over there. There was a glass of water on the table. He was too weak to even pick the glass of water up at the time. And I bent down to see what he wanted, and he whispered, "Get Elsie." So I went to get Elsie, and she listened to him, and she went and got his wife, and between the two of them, they got him up off the sofa, walked in between them into the bedroom and disappeared. And then they came out. One was carrying boots and a boot shining kit, and another one brought a shirt out and set up an ironing board and started ironing the shirt. And I said, "What's going on?" And Elsie said, "Well, he's been summoned for a contact." I said, "In that condition? How can he go to a contact?" She said, "He'll make it." So he came out after having taken a bath, and he before a contact, he takes a bath, and he changes all of his clothes from the inside out. Underclothes, outer clothes. His shoes are shined. They clean up everything. He brushes his hair, combs out his beard, like he's going to a big business meeting. And he came out about an hour later and into the kitchen, where I'm out there with the women drinking coffee and watching what's happening. And they brought out his pistol and his walkie-talkie. His pistol, mind you, is a 44, an old Western 44. It's the heaviest gun in the world. It's got a bore on it like that, and it weighs a lot. I can hardly lift the thing. And that's what he carries for protection. He carries it in a big holster on the side. And he took that out, and he sat down at the table, dumped all the bullets out, and looked in the barrel, put the bullets back in again, put it together, put it in his holster. And then he took the walkie-talkie, opened it up, and dumped the batteries out, and put fresh batteries in. Then he put his wife came out with an Air Force B-4 jacket, a blue jacket with a mouton collar, fake fur collar, because it had been raining all day. It had been raining the day before, all night, all this day, and it was still drizzling. It was lightly raining. There's little raindrops bouncing into puddles that were all over the place because it had been raining so long. So they put this coat on him to protect him from that. He didn't wear anything on his head, and he's standing in front of the stove, which is at one end of this big oak table in the kitchen. I was at the other end at the sink pouring me a cup of coffee. People started coming in the door from work. It's about 6 o'clock now. Well, it was later than that. It was about 8 o'clock. And they were coming in the door from work, and they see him already. They know where he's going. They just look at him and ask a couple of questions and go on about their way. The things. A few stood there waiting to see when he was going to leave, but he's all prepared, but he hasn't got the final signal of where he's going and when. And finally, I'm just pouring a cup of coffee when he raised his little hand and kind of a wave to them, a salute, and started out the door. He finally got the word. So I set my coffee cup down, and I raced around the table and out the side door. I want to see him go. I missed everything else. I'm going to see it this time. And as I passed the stove, the clock was right over the stove. It said 8:25. I remember that. And when I got to the door, the big dog that was chained on a chain could run right out just close enough to scare the hell out of you, but he couldn't bite you because he was restrained. And I jerked the door open. The dog just missed me, and I went out the door and into a lean-to. It was a lean-to like this that ran about 15 feet to a door that went outside. And I got out into the lean-to to see the door in the end of it closing on his heels. And I ran to the door and jerked it open like that, because I'm not going to let him out of my sight. And when I jerked it open, there's 1, 2, 3 footsteps in the mud out there. The ground was soft enough, the mud squished out of the footprints like that. And water was bouncing in, the little drops were bouncing in the puddles all around. Water was starting to run in the first footprint. And there was no fourth footprint. And it was quiet. It was silent. There was no noise out there. There was no light, no beacons, no sound of any kind, and he's gone. And I thought, he couldn't have. How could he could he back up? No, he'd back into me. Did he run around the house? Couldn't run around the house. I even ran around the house to see if he could have, and all I left was slippery, muddy prints out there. And I got all wet waiting for him to come back. And I missed him going, so I want to see when he returns. And I got all wet. I went in and changed clothes, and I put on a raincoat, and I went back out. Was standing outside when there was a telephone call ring in the house, and somebody answered it upstairs and then raised the window. Said, it's Billy, he's down, he's over at Elg, and he wants you to come with his wife and Jacobus to pick him up. So we got in the car and splashed through puddles, and the rain was pouring down in some places and just drizzling in others. There was a lot of mud and slipping around on those mountain roads. We went all the way around the mountain, about 18 miles to Elg to pick him up. And when we got there, we found him standing under that little eave. It's only about 3 boards wide, over 3 steps that goes into the side of a guest house. And he's standing under the eave, and he doesn't have any mud on his shoes. He's not wet. His hair's not wet. Dry as could be, and he'd been out in the storm for some 45 minutes. It was, when the call came in, it was about 20 after 9, and he went out at 8:25. So he got in the car, and he's obviously dry, and I said, can you tell us anything about what happened? He said, oh, I don't want to talk about it, Mr. Stevens. Now I have to back up a minute because I forgot one thing. When I came in, when I was all wet, and came in the house and changed clothes, and I came downstairs, the Germans are all bunched up in front of their television set there watching something on the screen. So I went in to take a look. And on the screen was black with white letters on it. Said, it's just a big cross, and it said in German, the Pope has passed. The Pope has died. And I said, how did he die? And they said, haven't made any announcement yet, just the music and the sign. The program stopped, the sign, the music, that's all. No announcement. So I thought, well, hell, I don't need to watch this. I want to go out and see the big thing. I want to see him come back. So I went outside to wait, and then they got the call, and he came back, and now we get in the car, and I said, I'm trying to make conversation, and he's facing the front, and his wife is sitting next to me in the back, and I said, did you hear the news? He said, you mean about the Pope? And I said, yeah. They haven't even announced how he died yet. We don't know what happened. He said his pump failed. His heart failed. I said, how'd you know that? He said, I watched him. And I thought, oh, that's really strange. And I asked him some more questions. He said, I don't want to talk about it. But when we got to the house, the Germans all went in the living room and closed the door. And they stayed in there talking and talking and talking. Nobody came out, so I finally got tired and went to bed. And I'm up early the next morning to see what happened the night before. And he got up about 10 o'clock, and I waited from 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock for him to get up. And I tried to ask him questions in the kitchen, and he motioned for me to come out on the patio. And we went out there, and he said, sit down, Mr. Stevens. I did. He said, I watched them murder a pope last night. And I said, murder a pope? They don't murder popes. He said, they do. They've done it before, and they did this one. He said, I saw the whole thing on the viewing screens. He said, they showed me who did it, how it was done, why they did it, everything. And he said, and I kept insisting they don't murder popes, and he kept saying, but they did. And then he said, he gave me the reason for it. And then he said, I can tell you something else, Mr. Stevens. He said, the next pope, his successor, will be elected in the largest conclave in history, in the shortest ballot in history. He'll be elected on the 3rd ballot. He'll be the 33rd pope, reign 33 days, and die by the same hand. And I thought, Jesus, now I got something I can really test. So I made very careful notes when I got back to my room. I wrote down exactly what he said, and I brought it home with me. And I showed it to other people, and you know what happened? That next pope was elected on the biggest conclave in history because they had more cardinals than they've ever had. He was elected on the 3rd ballot. The only pope was ever elected on the 3rd ballot. He was not the 33rd pope the way we count popes, so that was wrong, but he died on the 33rd day by a heart failure. The same, in the Catholic dictionary, they have the same description for his heart failure. It's a heart spasm. It's a cramp in the heart. And Meier is telling me on the patio out there that they used a poison that causes the heart to cramp, goes into a cramp. And it only lasts, it evaporates out of the body in the temperature of the blood, the heat of the blood, and is gone in about 10 minutes, but it's long enough for it to kill the body. And no autopsy will detect it. They just die of a cramp in the heart. A heart seizure is what they call it. So exactly that happened. I waited 33 days. 3 days, they elected the next pope, and 30 days later, he died the same way. So that was one thing that I could test, and there's a lot of things like that. Now, I don't want to take all the time here. I've already gone too far with my time. I would kind of block this out because Michael Hessman, sitting down here, has been to Switzerland. He's met and knows all the principals. Billy's an old friend of his now, many of the other people there. And I'm going to ask Michael to come up and tell you a little bit about how he got into the case and what he thinks of it. When you investigate the Billy Meier case, the most important thing is to talk to the witnesses, because, as I said before, you cannot fake witnesses. What we have here now is a situation of 50 eyewitnesses. But before we come to the witnesses, let me show you some of the most impressive evidence of the Billy Meier case. We were able to retrieve the original 8mm film Billy shot in 1975 and 1976, and to give it back to Billy after the originals were stolen from him. So these films are in the circulation. Okay, and here we have one of the beautiful films Billy took in 1975 in an area called Bergrumlikon, and this film was taken in June 1975, and the film you'll see after this was taken just from up there. So we have two films taken in the same general vicinity, and down here you have cars driving up and down on a kind of road. This was a cut. It was not a movement of the craft, but a cut to a different sequence of the film. And here again, it makes some of its typical floating movements, and they have to do with the propulsion. They are riding on the gravitational waves of planet Earth, and to be in a hovering position always means a floating position, like a ship on the waves of an ocean is floating. So here we have the ship closer. Again, note the floating movement. Very interesting. And here Billy zooms in. It is not the ship coming closer, but Billy zooming, because you see the cloud also gets closer. So Billy is zooming in and out, but you get more details. And keep in mind, he does everything with one arm. This is another beautiful film taken in March of 1976, actually on March 29th, and at an Hasenbol area. And here you have the ship partially disappearing behind the hill. It is definitely beyond the hill. We analyzed it very carefully. And it sometimes disappears behind the hill and comes up again. So now it's moving up. Very slowly and deliberately. I mean, they can shoot away as we saw before, but deliberately, very slowly, so Billy has more possibility to film. These are mountains in the background, snow-covered mountains. Here we have Free Craft, beautiful film, also taken end of March 1976. Actually, can you turn on the audio? It has audio, and just to give you an idea how Billy edited it 25 years ago, because it's funny. Billy loved it. This is still Billy Meier on the 29th, in this case, 29th of March 1976.
Auf einer weiteren Filmaufnahme vom 28.
28, okay. Wendelle got it wrong in his book. I copied this from your book.
Jedoch bereits in den Abendstunden kurz vor Sonnenuntergang.
In the evening hours just before sunset.
Bei diesem Filmteil können Sie einige wenige Einzelheiten des Schiffes
and you
erkennen.
see some details of the ship. I translate what Billy says.
Langsame sich Drehen des Schiffes während
like a slight rotating movement, rotational movement, and you have these objects here. And you see the slight rotation. Here we have enlargements from the Billy Meier films. We enlarge them so you see more details. And this is again the film we saw before from June 1975 from the Bergrumlikon area. And you can study the movements, and you can study how it is shooting away, and there was no cut
I show you quickly where Billy is living. This is Hinterschmied Rüti. This is in the winter, in February, in a winter evening, beautiful landscape. This is the house where he lives. This is Billy's farmhouse where he and some of his friends live together, because Billy as a contactee is working for his mission all the time. And he is a contactee, so he can't, have a regular job and a regular income. So some of his friends who have normal jobs just rented the house and they live there together. Billy's group has the name Free Interest Group for Spiritual and Ufological Studies, what means in German the acronym FIGO, for Freie Interessengemeinschaft für geisteswissenschaftliche und Ufologiestudien. But every single human being must recognize that its purpose in life, its meaning of life is evolution by recognition. Evolution by recognition and not by believing anything. Billy is the biggest non-believer I never met. He doesn't, he doesn't teach any doctrine, and he doesn't want anybody to believe anything. This is not what the Pleiadians teach them to do. Man has to evolve, each and every one by himself.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that.